Hi friends, today we're talking about the best faction in all of 40k. Get these super soldiers and existential horrors out of here. I picked that guy. Just a normal ass guy with a gun. Yup, that's what I want. In a world of gods, demons, and aliens, you'd have to be a spectacular lame-o to pick the normal human faction, right? No! Well, I'm a little lame, but the Guard isn't. These guys are the backbone of the Imperium. Sure, the Marines are the Emperor's greatest warriors and are super cool, but the Imperial Guard are the dudes who actually get down in the trenches, oftentimes literally, and get shit done. So, if you like a load of guns, glorious mass infantry charges, a ton of tanks, and the unrivaled power of the indomitable human spirit, fix your bayonets and get ready to hear about the best 40k faction. The Imperial Guard began in the Unification Wars as the Imperial Army and were the regular human combatants of the Emperor. Just like in 40k, they were the main fighting force of the Imperium. However, 30k differs in that oftentimes the Guard were directly commanded by Marine legions. So, unlike 40k, the Marines and Guard were essentially one big entity, with Guards mostly providing the numbers that Marines logistically couldn't, and they were often the forces that finished off and defended conquered worlds after the Marines had done their thing. Yup, you heard it here, folks. Marines, they have trouble finishing. Guard is more base confirmed. Of the Imperial Army, the most elite guardsmen of the time hailed from the solar system and were known as the Solar Auxilia. These guys are really cool and really only second to Marines in terms of skill and training. Also, special shout out to the Lucifer Blacks, the ultra elites of the Solar Auxilia. These were some of the most, if not the most, elite guardsmen in the setting and maybe ever. But anyways, the Guard being under command of the Space Marine Legions proved problematic when half the Space Marine Legions decided to heresy and conveniently had the authority to tell half of the Imperium's army and naval forces to worship Satan with them. So then, the Horus Heresy happened. Primarch this, Primarch that, Siege of Terra, yada yada. After all that crap happened, the Imperium had radical reforms headed by the Ultra Mega Chad Rabuda Gilliman. Key among these changes were to heavily segment and limit the forces of the Imperium. Famously, the Marine Legions were split into smaller chapters, and a similar thing happened to the Guard. Firstly, the Imperial Army was made into its own entity with its own common structure separate from the Astartes. Next, it was split into the Imperial Guard and the Imperial Navy. In theory, this meant that the Guard could no longer wage its own wars since it could not traverse planets, and the Navy, while having the ability to traverse the galaxy, simply wouldn't have the manpower to wage wars and hold territory. Another precautionary measure was breaking the Guard into relatively small specialized regiments of a few thousand. However, sometimes they're much larger, surpassing the six figures, and others like the super heavy tank regiments were quite small. It's important to keep in mind for this and almost everything else I say in this video that the Guard is such a huge and wildly diverse faction that there are potentially enormous variations between sub-factions. Most things are generalizations for most regiments. Oh, and also keep in mind that for the Guard, regiment can refer to the sub-faction, i.e. Cadian, Mordian, Steel Legion, etc., or it can refer to the regiments within the sub-factions, i.e. the Cadian 8th or Elysian 110th. Anyways though, the most common regiments are infantry, tank, mechanized, and artillery regiments. This means that multiple regiments would have to work together in order to effectively wage war. Only the most trusted and elite regiments are allowed to field combined arms regiments, or in the case of Krieg, siege regiments. Anyways though, the idea of making the regiments small and specialized was again so that no one regiment could have the power to rebel on a large scale, since they would skew too hard into one thing. However, based on tabletop, an infantry-only regiment probably could succeed, solely based on the fact that any opponent it faces would likely fall asleep during your 4-hour turn 1. In addition to their base regiments, special attachments may be, well, attached to strengthen the regiment. Some common attachments are abhuman squads, heavy weapon platoons, tank companies, psychers, and the coolest units ever, stormtroopers! Woo! Anyways though, now we know that Guard big, but how do Guard get big? Well, typically Guard regiments are built up from mandatory planetary tithes. These tithes can vary and are calculated by the Departamento Munitorum, who handles all of the Imperium's military logistics. A planet's tithes are calculated based on the planet's size, level of development, what other contributions they make to the Imperium, location of the world, and of course, with a bureaucracy as big as the Imperium, there's a load of corruption, so how much the government likes you is also a factor. But finally, another one of the most iconic measures taken to ensure loyalty was the introduction of commissars to watch over regiments, raise morale, offer guidance, and most importantly, enforce loyalty, often with a well-placed bolt round. Which, also, I think many forget the first two things I mentioned with commissars. Ideally, there are inspirational figures who are elite warriors with a contagious amount of loyalty and dedication. These fellas are trained in the same place as scions and sisters, after all. And, since I'm a dumb baby, the nicer inspirational commissars are my favorite ones. But, for more unruly regiments, they do have to be enforced, and we get the more brutal commissars. Anyways though, in the present setting, the Imperial Guard is the single most important military force in the entire Imperium. There are, and I quote, countless billions of guardsmen fighting across the galaxy. And I'm a pretty sharp fella who can count quite high, so I think it's safe to say there's a whole lot of guardsmen. The Guard is the hammer of the Emperor, and they have been holding the line against any and all of the biggest threats in the galaxy for millennia. They may not be the strongest, the fastest, or the most glorious of warriors, but what they lack in quality, they compensate 1,000-fold in sheer quantity. Literally nothing in real space is able to tank 300 million last shots with the side of battle cannon. Some people believe that greater demons or other big centerpiece units can only be taken out by space marines or something like titans, but that's wrong. By combining the indomitable human spirit, some good old-fashioned teamwork, and a super heavy shadow sword volcano cannon, the humble guardsmen can take out any threat they may face. Guardsmen are able to handle nearly all foes through coordination, resourcefulness, and strategy. They don't have the luxury of making mistakes, so the best of the guardsmen are some of the most competent soldiers in the entire setting. But if competency fails or is lacking, many dudes will do as well. It is a simple fact that Marines have cool guy privilege and get a disproportionate amount of stories. But the thing about disproportionate stories is that it's disproportionate. The Marines are an infinitesimal force in the face of the good old Guard. It is outright stated that the Guardsmen outnumber the Marines millions to one. So, even in the most insane stories where Marines can take out hundreds of Guardsmen before dying, after taking out hundreds of Guardsmen, they would still have roughly 1 million more to face. And this applies to basically every other faction, as the Guard are almost the most numerous force in a war zone. Even against Orcs or Nids, the Guard are often the larger organized force. Against Orcs, it's rare to see the bulk of the Green Tide being on the same page of anything, but fight is good! And luckily for the Imperium, the Nids are seemingly not in full force most of the time. Let's just put it this way. If the Marines disappeared one day, the Imperium would have a bad time. If the Guard disappeared, the Imperium would not exist. Anyways, let's move on to their fighting style. And again, I have to reiterate that the Guard is a wildly diverse faction, so their fighting style isn't the most uniform. Usually, you'll see dudes in flak armor with a lasgun and some grenades, maybe with a funny outfit. But also sometimes you'll see some dudes freeballing it. Literally, this is a real regiment at its peak. Point is though, Guard regiments can be highly unique from one another. For example, you have the highly trained combined arms tactics of the Cadians, guerrilla jungle master of Catachan, drop assault Elysians, mechanized steel legion, and so on and so forth. But generally, most Guard regiments deploy a large infantry force armed with the always trusty lasgun, and the near-endless waves of the Emperor's bravest souls are supported by a gargantuan amount of tanks, artillery, and other war machines. So, just imagine hundreds of Leman Russes shaking the ground with treads and fire, millions of Guardsmen charging, blasting lasers and swinging bayonets, all the while getting pounded by non-stop artillery shells blocking out the sun. That is the might of the Guard. They are a behemoth that crushes anything in their path through fathomless firepower and sheer will. The most tried and true strategy is to leverage their overwhelming numbers against whatever foe they face and grind them down through insane chip damage. In the Imperium, the only truly expendable resource is human life. But this doesn't mean that the Guard commanders are stupid. Far from it. The Guard actually has some of the greatest strategic minds in the entire setting. After all, it takes some skill to defeat super soldiers, ultra tech Xenos, endless armies, and the literal forces of hell with your average Tom, Dick, and Harry. These fellas have to take into considerations the weaknesses of the Guard, like generally weaker armaments, morale issues, logistical constraints, and like a million other things. But the best of the Guard commanders know that the Guardsmen are an expendable resource to be spent, not wasted. Yes, countless Guardsmen die in most battles, but commanders often don't just send men into the meat grinder for the lulz. They make calculated and callous sacrifices to win the day. They cunningly coordinate infantry companies, artillery batteries, stormtrooper squads, special units, and sometimes even hidden Baneblades in masterful displays of destruction. However, not everyone is the best, and there certainly are many commanders who do just send waves of guardsmen into certain doom with reckless abandon. But that's more the exception to the rule, otherwise the Imperium simply wouldn't exist. And another one of the coolest, if not the coolest aspects of the Guard is the crazy diversity within the faction. Since they are such a huge force and the Imperium has such a wide range of worlds and cultures within, they have a ton of room for interesting variations. In just one faction, you could have a Rambo army, Techno Cossacks, sci-fi drop troopers, World War I edgelords, the British. The possibilities are endless. And with the diverse cultures, they've also got a diverse array of fighting styles. You got unrelenting infantry hordes, elite stormtrooper squads, horses, 1 million tanks, and many, many more. And the cherry on top is that the Guard Command can and often will mix and match regiments for even more unique forces. It's not uncommon for regiments to work together either out of desperation or because the commander wants to have some fun theory crafting with some silly combos. The Guard is simply the most diverse faction in the entire game and also has the most hobbying potential. Most 40k factions are vast and have differences, but they're still bound by a general theme of sorts. Marines will always look like Marines with potentially different doodads here and there. Necrons are skeleton boys with different colors. Eldar and Tau are pretty standardized. Tyranids are a literal hive mind. And even the kit-bashing darlings, the orcs, are literally genetically predisposed to acting and dressing in a generally samey way. Guard, on the other hand, can go pretty damn crazy style. Once you got humans with lasguns and tanks, you can basically do whatever you want from there. Sometimes even those aren't required materials. Which bridges me to my absolute favorite aspect of the Guard. They are literally just people. Often highly trained and elite people, but just people. These ordinary people regularly conquer horrors beyond their comprehension, they brave impossible odds, and they crush foes far greater than themselves. To me, the guardsman who bayonet charges a flaming, sword-toting demon is infinitely more courageous than the genetic freak who literally can't feel fear. The guardsman gazes into the abyss and they shoot the shit out of it. They're badass. In addition, as far as 40k goes, the Imperial Guard is truly humanity incarnate. Beyond looking super cool, the various regiments being inspired by various cultures of the world, and the Guard being composed of anyone who can shoot a gun and yell loud enough, really plays into the idea that the Imperial Guard is the amalgamation of all of humanity. The faction is an inspiring story of all of humanity banding together, sacrificing all that they've got to keep themselves and their fellow man alive. The men and women of the Guard will stop at nothing to keep humanity from the brink of death. And if they fail, gosh darn it, they're gonna cause quite the ruckus on the way to the grave. Plus, they got a fuckload of cool ass tanks. Badass! But anyways, that's the Guard for now. I absolutely love these little guys. I think they're truly the most compelling faction. I love how much they represent humanity and embody the worst and best aspects. Just normal people with a rifle and the indomitable human spirit keeping the Imperium alive. Badass! Plus, the hobbying and homebrew potential is just so fun with them. More so than anyone else, the faction encourages creativity, which is my favorite part of 40k as a franchise. As for what's the best regiment, obviously it's the Cadians. 100% factual jokes aside, though, the most powerful regiment is a debate that hardly makes sense to me, as almost all the regiments we see featured are literally the best and most renowned regiments in the entire Imperium. And even the loser guy no-name regiments are usually composed of the planet's best. But the guys who get book spotlights and codex sections are the cream of the crop, probably like the top 10th of a percent of the guard, if not higher. The average guardsmen in these famous regiments are probably equally or more competent than our modern special forces. Seriously, the amount of child soldiers in this setting is insane. So, they're all the most powerful in their respective fields. But looping around, Cadia's respective field just so happens to be being the best, so what can I say? But anyways, comment below what your favorite regiment is, and if you either agree that the Guard is the best faction, or if you're a big old wrong guy. Anyways though, if you're interested in the Guard, I've got some regiment focuses up, and I plan to make more, so stay tuned. Also, I really hate when people say that the Lehman Russ needs to be redesigned with a smaller, more realistic gun. Yeah, sure, let's get rid of the coolest and most iconic part of a cool sci-fi tank in the name of realism. Blech. You make me sick. Hi friends, today is a very special episode because we're talking about my favorite and the objectively best guard regiment, the Cadian Shock Troopers. Cadians are the poster boys of the Imperial Guard, and for good reason. Everyone thinks they're just boring vanilla lamos that represent the Guard, but they're actually super cool. They're the poster boys for a reason, and goddammit, vanilla's a good flavor. Also, be prepared. This is my favorite faction. So, if you ever went to a Krispy Kreme and watched the donut making process, well, you know that funky little step after the fryer? Yeah, that's exactly what this video is going to be for roughly 15 minutes. So, without further ado, let's get right Cady into it. The Cadian Shock Troopers are the elite guardsmen who originated from the lost world of Cadia. They are one of the best, if not the best warriors in the entire Imperium. The world of Cadia was not always lost, and before it fell, it was the mightiest fortress world after Holy Terra itself. And before it was the mightiest fortress world after Holy Terra itself, it was just a middling fortress world, presumably also less mighty than Holy Terra. And before it was a middling fortress world, presumably also less mighty than Holy Terra, it was a filthy degenerate world full of filthy degenerate chaos worshippers. But the Chaos Cultists fortunately went extinct with the help of some cyclonic torpedoes, and that cleared the way for the Imperials to establish Cadia into a legendary fortress world we knew and loved prior to its tragic fall. Cadia and the Cadian Shock Troopers' claim to fame was guarding the entrance to literal space hell for damn near 10,000 years. Since they were tasked with defending the only good passage out of the Eye of Terror, the Cadians developed a strong warrior culture and became some of the greatest guardsmen ever. Every part of Cadian culture and society was militarized. Their government was based on military merit, their cities were labyrinthine fortresses, and their child soldiers were even younger than the average Imperial child soldier. Woohoo! You see, many guardsmen begin their training in their teens. In contrast, pretty much the instant they're able to, Cadian children are taught how to fight. They're commonly said to be able to strip and shoot lasguns before they could even write. That means we got little Cadian Tim over here casually shooting assault rifles at age 5. This also means that the age that most other guardsmen would start their training, Cadians have over a decade of experience. Then, after their extensive childhood training, every teenager is sent to serve in the White Shields platoon for further training. Presumably, they're called the White Shields because it's a platoon of pubescent teenagers. Here, they do live fire practice, field training exercises, and have core Cadian values instilled in them. Cadian culture highly emphasizes marksmanship, discipline, teamwork, and of course the other Imperial values like self-sacrifice, resilience, extreme xenophobia, etc., etc. Additionally, somewhat uniquely, they're given a basic education on chaos and the perils of the warp. This gives them a rather unique resistance to chaos taint and a greater resolve in battle. And their training is some of the highest quality training in the entire Imperium. So every Cadian Shock Trooper is roughly at the level of a Special Forces operative from our world, if not better. Speaking of better, the White Shields who show the most promise are sent to the even topper of the line training in order to become the coolest dudes in the galaxy, the Kazarkin. Woo! More on them later. So, after their time in the White Shields, Acadian is trained to be a proper shock trooper and then sent to various battlefields to fight for the glory of the Imperium. Furthermore, Acadian officers are all promising White Shields or veterans who rose to the ranks through battlefield feats. They find the idea of an officer learning stuff in school, like a nerd, rather than in battle, to not only be dumb, but also silly. But speaking of officers, you know what officers tend to do? They dispense tactics like some kind of tactic dispensing machine of some sort. Cadians, they have some of the best tactical minds in all of the Guard. Legendary commanders like the Ultra Mega Chad, Lord Castellan, Ursarkar Creed, his daughter Ursula Creed, and the indomitable Knight Commander Pask all hail from the world of Cadia. But beyond that, what tactics do these tactical geniuses tactic with? Well, the Acadian Shock Troopers are one of the few regiments trusted to field combined arms regiments. You see, after the heresy, the armies of the Imperium were highly segmented so that no one regiment would have the means to rebel and cause major damage like Mr. Heresy did. This is why the Space Marine legions were broken into smaller chapters. This also means that usually Guard regiments are highly specialized. For example, artillery, tanks, and infantry would all be separated in their own regiments and made to work with the others. However, due to the importance of their job and their legendary track record, the Acadians are allowed to field combined arms regiments that are more readily able to respond to threats. A typical Acadian regiment will have a corps of shock troopers supported by tank, artillery, and other special companies. This makes for an extremely efficient fighting force with unparalleled cohesion and flexibility since every battlefield role is under the same regimental command. Castellan Creed's personal regiment, the Acadian 8th, is the epitome of Acadian combined arms tactics, and they continue to kick ass after nearly being wiped out in the 13th Black Crusade and losing Lord Castellan Creed. Then, on a smaller scale, Acadian tactics revolve around coherent shock trooper squads, flanking enemy positions, holding objectives, and basically whatever else is needed. The Acadians' focus on squad cohesion and a tactical approach means that they're generally more efficient man for man. These squad tactics also mean that Acadians have an abnormally high survival rate and have the highest amount of veterans of all the Guard regiments. So, knowing 40k, that's probably like 10 Guardsmen. Just kidding, I low-key hate the Guardsmen all being useless meatbags who last 5 seconds and then die memes. Some can be useless meatbags, but not all of them, please. Acadians also specialize in urban warfare and shock tactics. Big shocker there. But their biggest strength is that they're the jack-of-all-trades regiment, able to do pretty much anything well. So I guess Acadians specialize in adaptability and, well, being the best. Which I suppose specializing in being generalized isn't really a specialization, or it might be. I don't know. Feel free to call me a dumb fool and tell me why Krieger specializing in banging shovels is just so much better in the comments below. But, of course, at the end of the day, Acadians are Guardsmen and they're willing to sacrifice themselves to protect the Imperium. In the face of hopeless odds, Acadians stand defiant and will fight till the very end. Hell, they literally lived at the gate of space hell for 10 millennia. The planet broke before the Guard did is a literally true statement. But on the other end of the cannon fodder spectrum, let's talk about the Acadian Special Unit. That's right, we're back to the coolest dudes ever, the Kazarkin. Woo! The Kazarkin are the best troopers of the best regiment of the best faction. I made a whole video about Imperial Stormtroopers, but the basics are that the Kazarkin are the elites of the Acadians and are either talented and promising White Shields or veteran shock troopers who receive extra training and better equipment to kick extra ass. Kazarkin originated as the key protectors of Acadian fortress cities called Khazars, but now they fight across the galaxy as the best soldiers a regular human can possibly be. They've got literally peak strength, peak speed, peak reflexes, and peak combat intellect. They're only second to Space Marines, but they still get Space Marine jobs done and they efficiently kill Marines. Speaking of killing, they typically carry hell guns or hotshot las guns if you're lame, which are basically upcharged las guns that can punch through most armor like it's, some easily meltable thing. I don't know. I probably could have figured out a butter analogy, but it's okay. They also commonly take special weapons like plasma, melta, grenade launchers, volley guns, and more depending on the mission. And just like their mother regiment, the Khazarkin are super versatile and basically do whatever task is needed from them. They can provide heavy firepower on the front lines, serve as rapid assault drop troopers, or carry out spec op missions in elite kill teams. Khazarkin are respected across the galaxy, and they're even requested by Inquisitors, Rogue Traders, Imperial Lords, and other notable figures to serve as their bodyguards or elite strike teams. And these notable figures need to be deemed worthy of the Khazarkin working for them. Yeah, they don't need a test if the Khazarkin are qualified to work for them, they need to be deemed worthy of the Khazarkin service. Badass. And fun cherry on top is that this little lore fact made the ridiculous difficulty buying Khazarkin the year of release lore accurate. Perhaps you simply weren't worthy of having a Khazarkin kill team in your service, and that's why GW wouldn't let you spend your 60 buckaroos on one. On top of the Khazarkin, Cadians also have a special pattern of Sentinel that has extra armor, and their shock troops favor grenade launchers and autocannons for their versatility. But finally, the big question. Why do I think that the Cadians are the best? Well, because they literally are. Jokes aside, though, Cadians are probably the single best regiment across the board due to the simple fact that they're just so dang versatile. You can drop them on literally any battlefield and they'll get the job done. Yeah, Catachan are badass and probably have the strongest guard characters around, but put them in the flat hellhole that is the American Midwest, and I don't think their Rambo guerrilla antics will work all that well. Valhallans, they're super cool, pun intended, but put them in the blazing desert and they'll make like a hiker visiting Vegas. That's to say they'll have a heat stroke and demonstrate why Death Valley is called Death Valley. Or drop a Krieger at a therapist office, and I don't know, they'd probably self-implode. The Cadians' versatility is invaluable to an empire as large as the Imperium. They have about 1 million worlds, one bad day away from being eaten by aliens, indoctrinated by Satan, or even just discovering the far-flung concept of worker rights. So, having a regiment that can effectively fight on any world with relatively short notice is a huge and necessary asset. That's why across the galaxy, many regiments treat the Cadians as an aspirational regiment and try to model their doctrines and equipment after the shock troops. Not because they're the absolute best at everything, but because they're good enough at anything. It's good to have specialists, but you need the generalists to keep things together. But, my Kriegers are cooler than the Cadians because they can fight in trudging wars of attrition lasting decades. Cool flex, bro, but my Cadians would simply win the war in a timely manner. But they're willing to die in the millions to accomplish anything. Newsflash, dummy. You gotta be alive to fight for the Emperor. But my unyielding resolve. Uh-huh. Cadians literally shot at spaceships with lasguns while their planet crumbled at their feet. Shovels! And that, my friends, is what we like to call a straw man. Very effective when I'm the one making the video and no one can tell me I'm wrong. But finally, let's address the War Master chaos in the room. Yes, Cadia did eventually fall in the 13th Black Crusade. Ha! How could they be the best if they'd lost? Loser regiment! Wrong! Hypothetically, let's consider a pair of jeans. They're purchased by the average Redditor, and for 10,000 years, they're the best pants ever. They're stylish, they're comfortable, and best of all, they don't burst under the, immense aura of the Redditor. But then, one day, the Redditor launches a steamy Blackstone load out of his Eye of Terror, and then the jeans finally rip. Does that make them bad jeans? No, I don't think so. Any force in the galaxy would have eventually faltered after 10,000 years of relentless assaults from literal hell. The fact that the Cadians stood strong for that long is insanely impressive. In the current time, Cadia was lost, but Cadia stands since the survivors of Cadia and Cadians who were deployed elsewhere keep the culture alive and have re-established new colonies to train more shock troops. They continue to be one of the greatest, if not the greatest, regiments in the entire Imperium. Also, anyone who says that Cadia doesn't stand because the planet fell is literally missing the point of the quote. Cadia stands because, just like their other iconic quote says, the people of Cadia literally outlasted their planet and are keeping the culture and legend of their regiment alive. The Cadians took a massive blow with the loss of their planet, but their sheer indomitable human spirit allowed them to live on and continue to serve the Imperium. But with that out of the way, here's a couple of fun Cadian facts. Cadians have purple eyes due to their former proximity to the Eye of Terror. There's a Cadian sergeant named Lucas Bastone who has perfect memory and tattooed the name of every guardsman who ever died under his command underneath his armor. And finally, Cadians also use gallows humor to cope with how sad their lives are. So, Gen Z rejoice, Cadians are truly the regiment of the people. But yeah, that's my overview of the best regiment of all time. Feel free to tell me how stupid I am, how boring the Cadians are, and why your favorite regiment is totally objectively better than my favorite regiment. But just remember, everyone always forgets the full quote. A jack of all trades is a master of none, but that's often better than a master of one. Cadians #1, baby! Let's go! Woo! And it's actually been a while since I covered the Guard, so I want to make kind of a big return with my favorite boys. In the future, I'll have to expand on the iconic Cadian characters like Pask, Creed, and other Creed. But for now, that's all I got. Thank you for watching, and thank you to my awesome patrons who help the channel grow and help me make cool videos. Also, I don't actually hate the Krieg. Their memes are just super cringe, and they're less cool Vostroyans with blue Steel Legion uniforms who do the Cult of Death thing less cool than the Janissaries. But as an apology to all the Krieg fans, maybe I'll cover them in the next Guard video. Or maybe I'll do Steel Legion instead, who knows? Hi friends, imagine if you will, a horrible, evil place where everything from the teeny tiny little bugs to the giant trees literally want to kill you. Here, trees don't speak Vietnamese because they're too busy chewing your squad mates. Now, imagine just how horrible a world like that would be. Then double it and give it to the next guy, and that guy would have Catachan. Catachan is one of the deadliest, if not the deadliest worlds in the entire setting. No, I'm just kidding. Catachan doesn't accept maybes. Catachan is the deadliest death world in the entire setting. On Catachan, literally everything is out to kill you. Every plant is poisonous, which would explain why every creature is carnivorous. Which makes literally no sense from an ecological perspective, but in the wise words of Pancreas No Work, this is Warhammer and science is for losers. And when I say everything wants to kill you, I don't mean how people describe Australia. I mean everything literally consciously wants to kill you. The planet is so dangerous that even Space Marines try their hardest and never end up on Catachan. They literally can't even make permanent buildings on this horrible planet since hostile vines will crush structures and poisons in the soil will dissolve building materials. This means they can't have any Lee sandwiches on Catachan, proving it truly is a horrible, horrible hellhole. But of all these horrible, evil things on the horrible, evil world of Catachan, it's a real testament to the jungle fighters that perhaps the most imposing thing on the world very well might be the Catachan Viper between the average guardsman's Herculean thighs. Or, whatever the female equivalent of that might be, because being a badass on Catachan has a very Anakin mindset. The Catachan Jungle Fighters are some of the most, if not the most, badass regiments in the entire Imperium, and are some of the most, if not the most, badass dudes in the entire setting. Since Catachan's such a hell world, it virtually has no valuable resources, so its only export is guardsmen in exchange for whatever resources the Catachan need. And the Jungle Fighters are so damn good, this might be the best deal in the last 40,000 years. The Imperium gets some of the coolest dudes ever, and the Catachan get a fun little vacation. The Catachan Jungle Fighters are literally an entire army of hardened badass action heroes who love nothing more than jungles and fighting. Well, actually they're more like two armies when you account for the legendary ultra mega badass one-man army Slime Marbo. But I already talked about him and the other badass characters of Catachan like Strachan, Nork, and Harker here, so be sure to watch that after this video. But anyways, due to the horrific conditions of Catachan, it's said that 50% of their people don't survive infancy, and that of those people, 50% of them don't survive to the age of 10. But that remaining 25% are some hardcore badass 10-year-olds because they have the insane feat of surviving 10 years on Catachan. Basically, from birth, Catachan are taught survival skills, combat, and probably how to properly flex. These madmen are literally taught to shoot before they can walk, which is really cool because this drawing of a baby shooting a tree that I made finally makes sense. And that gun baby thing isn't a joke. That's literal actual lore from the first Guard Codex. Or if you want to read it, you can find it in this old white dwarf. For the latter, thank you, Warhammer Vault. After 6 months, you're finally useful to me. And Catachan simply don't stop being badasses at age 10, even though at age 10 they're already deadlier than most other humans. As they continually face the horrors of their homeworld, their skills are honed until they can truly become a Catachan jungle fighter. Since only the most fearsome and resilient guardsmen are able to survive on their death world, Catachan are some of the best, if not the best, guardsmen in the Imperial Guard. Catachan jungle fighters' primary strength, other than their literal strength, is their skills in guerrilla fighting. The Catachan often can't get heavy armor support on their homeworld due to the dense jungles and vicious wildlife, so the Catachan have become experts in close quarters infantry fighting due to the low visibility of thick jungle, experts in stealth operations since they need to learn how to evade the fauna of Catachan, and laying booby traps cause, well, everyone likes boobies. Anyways, Catachan typically operate in tight-knit squads meant to look out for each other in whatever hostile environment they find themselves in. Also, please read this funny excerpt from the Codex, I really enjoyed it. From that though, Catachan squads are very close and fully trust their squad mates to cover their backs. In fact, it's somewhat common for Catachan squads to be made up of family members to tighten their bond. Catachan infantry squads are adept in sneaking around dense terrain, laying deadly traps, and coordinating ambushes. Through careful stealth, cunning ambushes, and imposing musculature, the Catachan are able to take down enemies far bigger and scarier than themselves. But sometimes you just gotta hunker down and fight something head on, and the Catachan sure as hell ain't slouches on that front. For being mere humans, Catachan are surprisingly vicious in melee, and when steel and muscle fails, the Catachan also have flamethrowers and big-ass bombs. For the former point, the Catachan are known for being incredibly strong, many offworlders even calling them baby Ogren. And they're also debatably an abhuman species, or close to it at this point. The Catachan have been on their planet since before the Imperium even existed. And due to this, some argue that since the people of Catachan have lived on the planet for so long, they evolved to be naturally stronger and more resilient due to the Death World's deadly ecosystem and increased gravity. Whether or not that's true, it's undeniable that the guardsmen of Catachan are muscly freaks in nature. And that muscle gets put to good use as every Catachan is an expert in knife fighting. Catachan knives are legendary throughout the galaxy for being some of the best, if not the best, knives ever. So, give me a second to make like a Frank Reynolds in a recession and sell you these knives. They're made out of Catachan exclusive steel alloy, which is basically the only valuable material on the planet. The fine craftsmanship and special alloy makes the Catachan knives unusually sharp, and they hold their edge nearly indefinitely. It's a Catachan rite of passage to craft your first knife. As such, it's a close personal tool, and they're very rare weapons. Thanks to their legendary reputation and rarity, it's incredibly hard for offworlders to gain access to Catachan knives, so much so that some swindling road traders have been known to sell counterfeits. If you aren't convinced though, these knives are so good that even the orcs seek them out. Which, on that note, orcs actually pretty frequently respect, or at least imitate Catachan since they think that Catachan are just such fearsome warriors. And yes, this means that the literal race, purpose-built to be the perfect warriors by some lizard gods, think that the jungle fighters are such good warriors that said perfect warrior race wants to be more like them. A funny example of this is on Octarius, where one war boss had his Gargants painted with green jungle stripes and a red bandana after fighting some Catachan. And in-game, these legendary badass knives and combat prowess epically translates to literally the same melee profile as any other basic human close combat weapon. Oh, sigh. Like, you get +1 a wound on a charge, which can be nice since you're always at least wounded on 5-ups, but damn. They also arguably have worse melee than any other guard infantry, cause at least the other guys can take power weapons and chain swords. But beyond their knife skills, the Catachan are also great marksmen, and they have a lot of snipers since they're already adept in surviving and hiding in concealed positions for an extended period of time. But their true favorite special weapons are flamers and demo charges, baby. Since their doctrine doesn't really synergize well with heavy weapons, flamers are a good portable alternative to bring some firepower to their infantry squads. It's also a good choice for their close combat specialization, and outside of combat, their flamers are good at clearing thick bush to make way for temporary camps or vehicle support. And if they ever need more fire for their firepower, many Catachan gunners favor the heavy flamers. But sometimes a flamer just doesn't have the punch needed to take down their prey. So they also heavily utilize demo charges and other explosives, both for their traps and grenadier assaults. And finally, for the weapons, the truest of Catachan mad lads, grab the heavy bolter and go a bit nuts. And although it might seem a bit crazy to use big ol' explosives in a confined space and flamers surrounded by very flammable trees and gases, the Catachan have nothing to fear since, and I quote, these weapons wouldn't dare harm a Catachan. Bad ass. Now, if only they could take plasma guns and get around that pesky hazardous rule with their sheer aura. Also, again, this is just a jab at their optionless game profile, nothing to do with lore. In lore, they do take plasmas. But then, moving on to the regimental structure, as far as guard regiments go, the Catachan are actually pretty unorganized and free-form. The most standardization that the Catachan have is their red bandanas that represent the blood oaths they made upon joining the guard, as well as representing looking really cool. And then they have their Catachan knives, of course. But beyond this, Catachan take whatever equipment that best suits them. But this doesn't mean that they're unable to work together well. Although Catachan generally disrespects authority, they do respect fellow badasses. And the Catachan officers are the best of the best. Catachan regiments are completely merit-based, and the guardsmen elect officers whom they believe deserves the authority. As such, they tend to dislike outsiders who come in and try to command them, namely generals from other regiments and especially commissars. Famously, the Catachan tend to frag commissars assigned to their units. But in some rare instances, commissars are actually able to earn their respect by demonstrating combat strength and respect for their culture. But this can also be a weakness for the regiment since, despite their grand feats and undeniable strength, the Catachan do have a reputation for being hard to work with. This, in conjunction with their distaste for authority and occasional drug addictions, means that they can sometimes be detrimental in multiple regiment operations. Another potential weakness for them is that they're pretty specialized for jungle fighting, obviously, and other hostile environments. Since they rarely utilize heavy armor and prefer guerrilla strikes, they'll have a pretty bad time on more open battlefields. However, this is mitigated by the fact that the regiment is incredibly adaptable and are great at learning new ways to take down whatever enemy they may face. Also, when they're in their element, they are absolutely unmatched. Some notable battles where they were in their element and wreaked havoc on their enemies was on the other famous worst planet ever, Armageddon, and on their very own homeworld. After the Second War for Armageddon and during the Third War for Armageddon, the Catachan were sent to fight orcs in the equatorial jungles of Armageddon, and along with the Armageddon orc hunters, they steamed some green ham. Then, famously, after the fall of Cadia, Catachan was assailed by Chaos Demon Legions, and although the initial surprise betrayal and attack inflicted some pretty heavy casualties, the Catachan, led by the coolest dude ever, Iron Hand Strachan, quickly turned the tide since they were much better at avoiding the perils of the jungle. The creatures of Catachan are equal opportunity killers and began to hunt literal demons, and despite relatively heavy corruption bolstered by the Great Rift's warp storms, the planet's wildlife essentially cleansed itself of chaos. Which, I know a lot of people cite this battle as a huge Catachan feat, but I still don't think people give enough credit for how crazy this is. Usually it takes planets centuries of hard work to be completely cleansed of chaos corruption, if ever. Meanwhile, on Catachan, some trees and creepy crawlies can just eat the force of hell and resume business as usual. Absolutely insane. But speaking of those little plants and creepy crawlies, I'll now go over some of my favorite of Catachan's evil-ass wildlife. Firstly is perhaps the most famous, that being the Catachan Devil. Essentially, it's just a giant evil centipede scorpion monster who may or may not have been descended from Tyranids severed from the hive. The Catachan Devils, which is the stormtrooper equivalent, and most elite Catachan unit is also named after this ferocious beast. Which, by the way, Slime Marbo's a Catachan devil, so these dudes are legit. So, essentially, Catachan devils are named after Catachan devils since they're so dang scary, except for the Catachan devil Slime Marbo. In that instance, the Catachan devil is far less scary than the Catachan devil. Then, the next one is also a pretty popular one, the Catachan Barking Toad, and its little cousin, the Lesser Barking Toad. These are cute little frogs that, when threatened, violently explode into the most potent toxins in the entire galaxy, and it liquefies nearly all life in a kilometer radius. And then the Lesser Barking Toads, liquefies nearly all life in somewhere less than a kilometer radius. Then, moving on, we have the Drake Bats, which are basically Ogryn-sized bats that swoop down from the trees to eat ya. And also, speaking of Ogryn, since I don't know where else to put this, the Catachan love to work with Ogryn since they have the same values of loyalty, toughness, and determination. But finally, my favorite Catachan critter, solely because of an excerpt in Codex Catachan, we have the Heretic Ants, named as such because they eat your souls. Get it? Souls? 'Cause heretics go after your soul? They bite your feet and they kill you with some evil-ass neurotoxins. Just 3 bites is said to cause instant death. And these little bastards are actually more feared by the jungle fighters than bigger beasts like Catachan devils, simply because they're harder to spot. But anyways, that's the Catachan jungle fighters. They're legitimately some of the most badass dudes in all of 40k. They're my second favorite regiment because they're one of the things in 40k that's still allowed to just be 100% unapologetically goofy and fun. It's also fun that they aren't burdened by their crappy world or have a grim demeanor like some other regiments might. These madmen legitimately love their home and are rarely down on themselves. They're literally an army of stereotypical action heroes who talk a big game and then kill some even bigger game. Like I said in my wolf video, they're the guard equivalent of the Space Wolves, and I say that in the best way possible. Every bit of their lore, they're hyped up so much that you start to think, well, these guys can't actually be that great. And then Harker crushes a Tyranid Ravener with his humongo bicep, and then Rambo blasts the rest of the horde with a heavy bolter. And that's not even the craziest Catachan feat. Which, also, I'm going to take a moment to exploit my platform a little bit and ask you kind viewers if anyone has a legit metal Sergeant Harker model. I can't find him anywhere, so if you have one and you're willing to part with it, please DM me on Discord and I'll buy him from you. Assuming it's not an insane price, that is. I really want him to complete my Metal Catachan hero collection, so I'd appreciate any offers. But back to the conclusion. I really dig these guys, and my Catachan Force has been one of the most fun projects to work on. I'm one of the few people who actually unironically likes the Catachan Jungle Fighter models. I have like over 100 of the Jungle Fighters. Yes, I am insane. And despite my annoyance at them not having any options on tabletop, I always take at least one squad of Jungle Fighters, and just like in lore, these fellas are badass. My Jungle Fighters are probably tied with my Khazarkan for the biggest badasses in my list. Some of my Jungle Fighters feats include killing an Orc Beast Boss in a heroic melee charge, getting charged and attacked by Fulgrim himself turn 1, and then somehow surviving the entire game, General Flamer badassery, and then just getting a ton of points with their super nice scout move. So, what I initially thought to be the worst battle line datasheet has been super fun to play with, and it might just be the best one. It's hard to compete with Stickies, but ooh, that scout is just so nice. But anyways, that's about all for now. If you want more Catachan stuff, be sure to watch my old video on the Catachan heroes. That one details a lot of the more insane-o Catachan feats. Or check out this really old video on guard inspirations. Thank you for watching, and thank you to all my awesome Patreons. You guys are all very epic. Honestly, the Catachan's greatest feat might just be that their models are still in production, considering how much people seem to hate them. GW did them super dirty with that web store paint job. Like, just look how much better they look in the Codex with the more subtle paint job. Hi friends, today we're going to talk about some radical dudes well known for dropping deep in enemy lines, utilizing orbital ordinances, and raising hell for their enemies. Who the hell are those guys? I'm talking about the Elysian Drop Troopers. who, by the way, predate the Helldivers by at least 15 years and predate ODSTs by at least 3. So, while most dropouts play COD, smoke pot, and sleep on couches, these dropouts drop out of Valkyries, smoke pirates, drive skydiving walkers, and just generally kick ass, so strap in and prepare to drop. The Elysian drop troopers predictably hail from the world of Elysia. This world is actually quite nice, with picturesque mountain ranges and thriving industry. Although Elysia itself is a nice planet, the surrounding void space is known as wilderness space, since it's generally unexplored and very likely dangerous. For the Elysian system, wilderness space means vast asteroid fields, uncharted moons, and gas clouds housing a crapload of pirate fleets, orc warbands, or even orc pirate warbands. Thus, the Elysians tirelessly defend their system against the never-ending threats of the wilderness. The wilderness in space! Most Elysian guardsmen are volunteers and must serve in the Elysian PDF before applying to be a drop trooper. Recruits are taught how to properly utilize grav chutes, survival skills for prolonged infiltration missions, and demolition skills. However, the Elysians' claim to fame is their rather unique fighting style. The drop troops, part of their name, isn't just there to look pretty. The Elysians primarily specialize in lightning airborne assaults and air assaults. Most famously, many Elysians utilize grav chutes to drop out of Valkyrie assault carriers deep into enemy lines in order to wreak havoc and dismantle enemy forces from within. Also, it's a common misconception that grav chutes are jetpacks when, in actuality, they're more akin to parachutes. These just use special, science-y anti-grav tech to slow down the trooper's ascent instead of big fabric. This allows the Elysians to have unparalleled mobility and tactical flexibility. Sometimes entire regiments can even drop onto enemy positions at a moment's notice. Just imagine chilling at Camp Chaos when you hear some distant jet engines, and then a few seconds later, hundreds of dudes are falling from the skies, shooting lasers like hellfire from above, and then they kick the shit out of you and your besties. Coolest shit ever! But more commonly than the super badass, ultra cool, all-out drop assaults, Elysians will deploy elite squads behind enemy lines in order to complete key objectives, or as I like to call them, drop ops. These drop ops can have a variety of objectives like blowing important shit up, killing key operatives, guerrilla strikes, or even just general chaos. General pandemonium within enemy territory. The Elysians drop behind enemy lines, are not supported after the drop, and are expected to complete their mission with only the equipment they were deployed with, which, luckily, they have access to some really good gear, but more on that later. Because of their limited supplies once dropped, Elysians are trained to be expert marksmen and are extremely resourceful. Elysians are some of the best, if not the best, marksmen of all the guard regiments. In fact, on average, Elysian guardsmen are generally more elite than other regiments' guardsmen. Not following the meat grinder approach of something like the Krieg or the Valhallans, they're all kinda like mini Kazarkin, which is badass. And while their lightning assault strategy is effective and has many advantages, it is not without faults. This strategy is very specialized and can be effective if used correctly, but it can also suck total ass if used incorrectly due to inherent limitations with a regiment like the Elysians. The drop troops are basically sci-fi paratroopers and have many of the same weaknesses as real-life paratroopers. No matter how badass it might be, there's a reason that the military doesn't just drop 100 dudes with assault rifles on everything they see. One key weakness is that the airborne nature of the regiment limits the units they can utilize in battle. Most notably, they forgo the use of heavy vehicles and tanks. This means that they're quite infantry intensive and, of course, have the weaknesses that come with that. However, they aren't completely without mechanized support, as they do have drop Taurus assault vehicles, drop Cyclops, and their own special pattern of drop Sentinel, which is just the coolest shit ever. Another unique Sentinel variant they utilize are support Sentinels. These are Sentinels fitted with either rocket pods or missile launchers, and they provide heavier support fire than standard Sentinels. They can also be fitted for drops, which is pretty badass. In addition, they can also call in orbital support and strikes from Vulture gunships for some extra heavy firepower. Then, another obvious weakness that's related to the aforementioned weakness is that the drop troopers can only use the equipment that they can be dropped with. Some common guard weapons are simply too heavy and cumbersome to be used in Elysian airborne assaults. But moving forward, or should I say, going down, another common tactic of the Elysians are air assaults, in which squads will work closely with their Valkyrie in order to complete key objectives. These Elysians often repel from their Valkyries, which is totally badass. And finally, a lesser known facet of the regiment is that due to the pirate fleets terrorizing the Elysian system, Elysians are also experts in ship-to-ship boarding actions. The Elysians' typical regimental structure is built around drop companies who have their own squadron of Valkyries and Vultures to support them. In addition to the drop companies, Elysians often work alongside the Tempestus Scions due to their similar fighting styles. Uniquely, many Scions are permanently attached to Elysian regiments and serve as heavy shock troopers as well as covert operatives. With that being said, I think it's time we touch on the Elysian drop troopers' gear. And a cool thing about the Elysians is that they're kind of a rich regiment, so unlike something like the Kriegers, they aren't seen as completely disposable and have some high quality equipment. Well, they're not completely disposable relative to other guard regiments. I mean, a guardsman is a guardsman. They, of course, have their iconic grav chutes, which are standard equipped to the drop troops and stormtroopers, which, by the way, Elysians do indeed have non-drop troopers, and those guys are called the losers. But anyways, the grav chutes allow for badass halo drops. Once landed, drop troops can quickly detach a grav chute and begin waging war or whatnot. In addition to their grav chutes, they're also issued a respirator to allow them to breathe in high altitudes. And finally, drop troops have the Elysian 68 pattern webbing so that they can hold all the weapons and equipment they need for their deployment. Which, speaking of weapons and equipment, the Elysians utilize a variety of high-quality, lightweight gear made at Forge World Akatran. Perhaps just as iconic as their grav chutes, Elysians utilize their distinct Akatran pattern las guns. The Akatran pattern is lighter than most other patterns and has a compact bullpup design so that they have even more room for the rest of their equipment. The Akatran has a few variants. The standard is the Mark IV and is a semi-auto only, playing into the Elysian signature precision. The Recon variant is the one that features in Darktide, and it utilizes down-powered blast shots in exchange for extreme rapid-fire capabilities. The Recon variant is often favored in boarding actions or mass drop assaults. This is also my favorite gun in Darktide. I mean, who can say no to going mega pew-pew with a laser gun? Finally, and perhaps most badassly, is the Mark IV E variant, which is just a Mark IV but fitted with an auxiliary grenade launcher. Badass! This one can also be modified into a sniper, which is also pretty badass. In addition to the humble las gun, Elysians also like to utilize assault shotguns. Elite drop troops sometimes even use sawed-off shotguns, which is illegal, but officers will turn a blind eye since they're totally badass. The guns and the trooper, that is. Beyond the standard weaponry, they've also got access to Akatran pattern special weapons. These are basically just lightweight versions of all the classic Imperial special weapons, this time with a cute and convenient carry handle. And finally, although it may sound antithetical to the regiment, the Elysians do utilize heavy weapons. Heavy? But yes, each drop company usually has at least one heavy weapons platoon. However, Elysian heavy weapon teams are limited to using heavy bolters, missile launchers, and mortars since las cannons and autocannons are too large for their drop operations. Their heavy weapons are all deployed via drop canisters, colloquially known as coffins. The coffins are roughly coffin-shaped, and beyond heavy weapons can also house extra supplies or special equipment for especially long deployments. Or, for especially long deployments, they can serve as a coffin. The most common special equipment afforded to the Elysians are las cutters and Akatran long-range ground scanners. Las cutters are simply mining lasers repurposed for breaching enemy fortifications and for boarding actions. Akatran long-range ground scanners do as their name suggests and perform long-range scans on the ground. These are useful as they give on-site tactical information and allow drop squads to be effective behind enemy lines even if they are severed from their commanders. But just as important as weapons and equipment, Elysians also have some stylish clothes, or as I like to call it, drop drip. Along with the special webbing I mentioned earlier, the drop troops wear a special jumpsuit with quilted impact pads for their rapid landings, modular thermal lining to adapt to the varied terrain of their operations, as well as the freezing temps of the high altitudes they operate in, and a bunch of pockets. Sorry to flex on the 2% of ladies in my audience, but Elysian fashion is just a cut above the rest. And by a cut, I mean miles above since, drops. Legions also have special lightweight flak armor and a pressurized helmet for their drops. These helmets are pretty cool too, as they automatically equalize pressure on descents, have flash suppression, and a display HUD to show their drop info. Whoa, that's just like Fortnite. But yeah, all in all, Elysians are really freaking cool. Like, who can say no to pirate fighting, drop trooper, and elite guardsmen? Dumb morons, that's who. Alright, I have a shameful confession. For the longest time, I didn't learn anything about Elysian drop troopers because I thought their models looked stupid. Boo! Boo! Yeah, I know. I am indeed a moron because these fellas check all of the boxes for me. They're relatively elite troops. They heavily utilize drop assaults, which I just love. They got badass high quality gear, they're infantry heavy, and they fight orcs and pirates. Sometimes even pirate orcs. Come on, man! Every day I like Elysians more and more. I honestly might like them even more than Catachan at this point. Also, Helldivers 2 is just straight up the best 40k game if you just imagine that you're an Elysian. But yeah, tell me what you think about the Elysians. You already know that I think they're super ultra badass. I love drop troopers, I love their badass drop sentinels, and I love calling in orbital strikes to show the Xeno, the heretic, and the mutant just exactly how wrong they are for daring to exist. And I hope in the future to get more lore and model support since GW really dropped the ball by axing their model line and aggressively neglecting them. And you know what? While recording this, I decided yes, they are indeed my second favorite regiment. Fine, Alicia, you got me. Rapid dropped right into my heart. But tell me your favorite guard regiment or regiments in the comments below. Anyways, thank you for watching and thank you to all the patrons who help support the channel and help me to make cool vids. Alright, come on. Elysians are some of the coolest dudes ever, but you have to admit, these models look like total nerds. Like, holy hunch, have you ever heard of postures, dudes? And their helmets just look so much cooler in artwork. Like, the combination of their weird face sculpts and glasses just makes them look like nerds. Hi, friends. Alright, there it is. The dead corpse of Craig. He was a good dude. R.I.P. Craig. Oh, wait, oops. I read that wrong. Today we're going to talk about everyone's favorite guard regiment, the Death Corps of Krieg. The Death Corps of Krieg are excellent warriors and are one of the best, if not the best guard regiments in the entire galaxy. They're also one of the most overrated factions in the entire galaxy. Let's get into Death Corps of Krieg. So, basically, shovel, shovel, shovel. I love World War I. Oh boy, a tank. Fix bayonets, fella. Yeah, I just feel so bad for what my great-great-great-great-grandpa did, and I think the only way I can atone for it is to die in a random minefield, you know? Of course, I'm just kidding, but of all the factions in lore, Krieg are perhaps one of the most squandered by dumbass Reddit memes and misinformation. But today I will show you the real lore and how they're actually much, much cooler than some suicidal shovel files. So let's get into the World War love child, unrelenting masters of attrition, the Kriegsmen. The Death Corps of Krieg originated on the lovely world of Krieg. And unlike other planets named after war or war derivatives, I'm not even joking this time around. Krieg was a beautiful and prosperous world that was an industrial powerhouse with prosperous trading. But the grand prosperity would become its undoing. The rich, corrupt autocrats of the world were like, ho ho ho, much like the glorious God Emperor of mankind, I am certainly rich and powerful. Wait. And thus, the autocrats of Krieg, led by a chairman who shall not be named, began their takeover of Krieg and succession from the Imperium. The rebelling forces took over most of the planet relatively quickly, and the only real Imperial holdout was on High Farograd, thanks to the effort of the Krieg 83rd and their glorious leader, the soon-to-be legendary Colonel Yurton. Yurton and his loyalist forces were vastly outnumbered with no hopes of reinforcements since no nearby Imperial forces were available. Yurton was told to hold Krieg at all costs by any means necessary. So basically, Imperium pulled a restaurant manager during rush hour, telling Yurton, "Oh, sorry, we can't help you here, but good luck, have a fun time." And so Yurden and the boys put up one hell of a defense, but they soon realized that this was a battle they would not win. Magos Griel, an advisor and ally to Yurden, suggested that he use some forbidden arcane dark agent technology hidden deep below Farograd known as huge-ass nuclear bombs. At first, Yurden was hesitant to unleash these weapons since he knew it would almost certainly ravage his homeworld for generations to come, and his other commanders were horrified at this prospect. Some people even sent warnings to the chairman, but he said, "I'm the chairman, not the listen to warnings and quit man." And those warnings quickly went to deaf ears. However, with some goading from Griel and figuring that if the Emperor can't have Krieg, then no one can, Yurden put his plan into motion and prepared the nuclear missiles. Missiles, eh? Kinda like rockets. While nuclear rockets certainly aren't good, you know what is? Today's sponsor, Rocket Money. Rocket Money is an all-in-one personal finance app that helps lower bills, cancel subscriptions, and manage your money better. I've personally been utilizing its budgeting features to, well, budget. It's been helpful to me budgeting my school, food, investments, bills, channel expenses, and, of course, minis. With Rocket Money, I set a customized budget to keep track of my spendings, and the app detects when I spend in order to provide insights on how to budget better. This is especially helpful in curbing my ever-growing pile of shame. Another awesome perk to budgeting that us 40k players may not be privy to is it saves money. With premium features like automated savings, Rocket Money has helped its customers save up to $740 a year when using all the app's premium features. To save money and spend less, join the over 5 million members using Rocket Money today. Go to rocketmoney.com/crackduck or click the link in the description to get started for free. Thank you to Rocket Money for sponsoring this video. Anyways, back to the less savory rockets. On the day of the Feast of the Emperor's Ascension, which is basically 40k Christmas, Yurden unleashed a crap load of nuclear missiles. Nuclear bombs in the present day are pretty nutty, and Dark Agent technology is like peak nuttiness, so needless to say, these nuclear bombs that Yurden shot were pretty damn nutty. The Colonel knew that the payloads were overkill, so he had them detonate in atmosphere in hopes of making the apocalyptic damage a little less apocalyptic, which honestly didn't really help in not completely destroying the planet. The nukes bathed Krieg's atmosphere with nuclear hellfire, caused planet-wide storms, and completely annihilated the local ecosystem. The planet was plunged into a nuclear winter, and billions died from the attack. Merry Christmas, heretics. At least it wasn't coal, I guess. Also, once again, nuclear is better than coal. This nuclear strike put the Loyalists and rebels on equal footing since Yurden's forces were prepared for the strike and took refuge in underground fallout shelters. Wait, Fallout? Is this some kind of guy from Fortnite reference? So, in nuclear annihilation, the Loyalists found hope. Said hope was promptly crushed when the Imperials let Yurden know they would definitely not be sending reinforcements now that the planet was worthless. What? I thought you wanted Krieg. Well, yeah, I did, but that was before it was a nuclear trash heap. Oh, yeah, that makes sense. So, once again, the Loyalists were on their own. The war progressed into a brutal war of attrition defined by its vast trench warfare. Oh my god, trenches! That means shovels! Wah! And yes, speaking of shovels, Kriegers of course use shovels as it's a useful tool, and it's feasible that they may use one as an improvised weapon once in a while. And it would be a pretty cool piece of flavoring since actual World War soldiers use shovels in trenches when bayoneted rifles prove too unwieldy. However, this does not mean that the Krieg's favorite weapon is a damn shovel, and it doesn't mean that they're gonna go shovel a tank the second the opportunity arises. It's just such a dumb meme that literally has no basis in lore, and it represents why I feel the misconceptions of Krieg lessen the faction so much. It's a cool and interesting idea, parroted into stupidity, thus diminishing itself into surface level trash. But anyways, in this time, Yurden's forces were beginning to be molded into the legendary death corps we know and love today. They adapted to the absolutely inhospitable hellscape of Krieg, became masters of attrition warfare, and of course, created their iconic Death Riders, which proved instrumental in the war. The Death Riders arose as the Loyalists needed fast cavalry and their mechanized options were beginning to fail in the Long War. So, the Mechanicus Biologists heavily modified some horses into the freaks you see before you now. These freaks were harder, better, faster, stronger than normal horses and had freakish claws that allowed them to tread the wasteland terrains, extra organs to survive the acrid atmosphere, and psycho injections to make them obedient, fearless, and more aggressive. So, these horses fulfilled similar roles as Sentinels and are surprisingly close in durability due to their extensive enhancements. But, due to the extensive enhancements, the rider has to constantly monitor their steed and inject drugs to keep it going. If you guys like ketamine, you gotta try what these studs are having. But, stemming off of a biological mechanic as abomination, you may ask, how can an irradiated wasteland of a planet produce enough guardsmen to sustain their endless waves in the wars of attrition? Well, sometime in the hundreds of years of war, Colonel Yurden began to succumb to the nuclear devastation that he unleashed. And on the Colonel's deathbed, Magos Grill suggested that he use the arcane vitae wombs and genetic sorcery in order to ensure the planet was protected by the great warrior even past his death. However, Yurden strongly opposed this abhorrent prospect and died soon after. Unluckily for him, though, the Magos was the only one to witness his death, and he did as he pleased. Don't use the vitae wombs.
What was that? I forgot to oil my mechano ears. I think I heard use the Vitae wounds though. If you so wish.
So, Grill used the esoteric vitae wombs. What exactly these are is unknown, but it's implied it's either some kind of cloning machine or genetic editor to make soldiers of Yurden's caliber, or even just a simple artificial incubation chamber. I personally think that the incubator with genetic editing capabilities makes the most sense. There's some evidence for the cloning theory since they almost always wear masks, vitae wombs are taboo, and the Imperium generally doesn't like cloning. Also, some of the Klieg colonels have identified themselves as Yurden long after his death. But also, it's not unheard of for soldiers to take on the name of Imperial heroes, so. And there's also compelling evidence against the cloning theory since there are men and women in the regiment, and Krieg tankers don't actually always wear their masks. It seems most likely to me that the vitae wombs are artificially inseminated to facilitate much faster birth rates, and somewhere along the process they're modified to prevent mutations and introduce favorable traits from notable warriors such as Yurzen. Whatever it is, though, we know is suspicious, it allows Krieg to be mass produced, and it kinda makes them weirdos. But, weird or not, it was likely vital to the regiment's survival. So, 15 grueling generations, hundreds of miles of trenches, and billions of lives later, the Death Chaps of Krieg finally won their planet back and returned to the Imperium triumphant. But, upon reporting that the planet was reclaimed, the Imperium didn't really care and just were like, okay, good for you. Make sure you pay your tithes now. And pay their tithes now they did. The Munitorum requested a single regiment from the Krieg, but they sent 20 whole regiments. Furthermore, the commanders of these regiments requested that they be sent to the absolute worst war zones in order to repent for their past sins. You see, even though the Kriegers successfully reclaimed their world and weren't even actually the ones who became traitor, they still had immense guilt over their plan's betrayal and the fact that they didn't reclaim it faster. So, they created a cult of sacrifice in which the average Kriegsman saw themselves as simply a resource to achieve the Emperor's will. As such, they have little regard for their own lives as long as it furthers their goals. However, this does not mean that they are suicidal like some other irksome memes like to push. Them being willing to die does not exactly translate to them wanting to die. They want to earn atonement through death, and this means doing something that will help the cause, not just hugging a mine or kissing a berserker. Think about it like this. You have a bunch of bullets, they're expendable by nature. However, you aren't just gonna mag them into some dirt when there's heretics to blast. Krieg are the same way. They're resources. They're expendable, but they're not to be wasted. Commanders and soldiers who act wastefully and stupidly are loathed by Krieg culture as they are squandering the Emperor's resources. So, generally, the Deathcorns are actually quite a tactical force that leverages their extreme numbers to win battles. However, they do tend to sometimes be a bit short sighted, prioritizing short term destruction at the expense of the long term. This can needlessly elongate wars, but luckily, they're used to long, miserable wars, so it's all good. Anyways, after returning to the Imperium, being cleared by the Inquisition, and battling in the worst war zones, they proved their mettle and rose to become one of the greatest regiments in the Imperium. The Planet of Krieg exclusively exports guardsmen, and the near endless guardsmen of Krieg are a valuable asset to the Imperium as a disposable hose of men to point at whatever problem they need to extinguish. Krieger trading virtually starts at birth. Young Kriegers have their minds broken and reforged to have an iron resolve. Then they're rigorously trained to survive in the harshest of conditions. And if they make it past that, they get to go to the surface of Krieg as their final test. Whoopee! On the surface, they put their trains to the test in the nuclear wastelands. Here, they participated in live fire, mock battles, clear minefields, and learn how to dig trenches. Oh my god! Shovels! Ah! Then, when that's all over, they get shipped out to the various war zones of the galaxy. Much like the legendary Cadian shock troopers, the Death Corps are one of the few regiments trusted to field combined arms regiments. This usually comes in the form of their famous siege regiments. The siege regiment's general tactic is to unleash unrelenting artillery bombardments upon the enemy from basilisks, medusas, and even mortars. These artillery barrages can last for months as the Krieg forces hide in fortified trenches until their enemy is crushed. Then, when their enemies are sufficiently broken, they send in endless waves of infantrymen to clean up. Their preferred transport are Gorgon assault carriers, Hades breaching drills, or just a good old fashioned mass infantry charge. The Kriegers are most famous for their grim resolve and strong morale in battle. Seeking atonement, they're usually willing to face any of the myriad horrors of the galaxy. I say usually because, once again, unlike their memes and Reddit lore, the Krieg aren't wholly unbreakable. They're still humans at the end of the day, and they have broken in the past and retreated. Also, I could just be mistaken here, so please let me know if I missed it, but to my knowledge, the Commissars being killed by Kriegers for order and retreats thing doesn't really have any basis in lore. The only time I can remember a Krieger killing a Commissar was actually so that they could retreat because they got spooked by the overwhelming Chaos forces on Frax. However, Krieg Commissars do tend to serve a bit of a different purpose in Krieg ranks. Kriegers are usually grim weirdos, and as such, many other regiments are off-put by their presence. So, one of the main duties of Krieg Commissars is to basically convince the other Imperial forces that Kriegers aren't too weird, and to try and coordinate strategies to complement the Krieg's lack of self-preservation. Anyways, another special unit that the Krieg have on top of their Death Riders and pretty unique Commissars are their Quartermasters, who are actually kind of similar to Marine Apothecaries in that they're medics and they scour the battlefield retrieving valuables of their fallen comrades. However, to Kriegers, the guardsman himself is not valuable. Their equipment is. So, quartermasters go around scavenging any useful equipment from fallen Kriegers, and they usually drop a quick little prayer for those lost. They also analyze battlefield stats such as ammo usage, casualty rates, and territorial gains in order for Krieg Command to take into account. Then we have their Grenadiers, which are the Stormtrooper equivalents. Unlike the much superior Kazarkin, the Grenadiers aren't specially recruited. Rather, they're made up of veteran survivors of destroyed squads. They're given heavy carapace armor, special weapons, and they're set on suicide missions to lead charges and destroy enemy fortifications. These dudes are more similar to heavily armored infantry than spec ops like other stormtroopers, but they still kick ass and they look sick as hell. Honestly, I think they're the second coolest looking stormtroopers. After Kazarkin, of course. Then next up, we got the Death Corps engineers who break enemy defenses, create trenches and tunnels for subterranean battles, and act as sappers. These guys are equipped with shotguns, mines, and a variety of grenades. And these would be the real shovel men if we must have one. Except more often they're using drills and such. But you know what? I'll give them the shovels this time. They also utilize the special mole launchers, which shoot breaching torpedoes called moles, which is pretty cute. Also, it seems like GW is merging the engineers with the grenadiers, which, if true, is super lame as they serve different roles and they're cool on their own. But finally, for special Krieg stuff, their lasgun is the Lucius pattern, which trades rate of fire for a more powerful shot. But we all know it's just to fit that World War vibe. Speaking of which, the death crops of Krieg are of course based on the forces of World War I. Not just the German ones, too. This is another meme that makes them a lot less interesting to me. The Krieg are an amalgamation of every World War force, which is one of the coolest aspects of them. The German influence is obviously the most apparent due to their name, but their uniforms are predominantly French looking. The helmet is a mix of French and German stylings. They have motifs of German lobster armor. The respirator looks British mixed with other styles. And there's other stylistic things in the infantry and vehicles that allude to other World War armies. But for the most important question of all, do I hate Krieg? No, not really. In fact, I think they're one of the coolest regiments. I also think it's really cool how they perfectly embody one of the core facets of the Guard with the near infinite numbers and sacrifices. But as I've alluded to before, I just really hate the memes about them. Just like most memes just reduce a faction to the most surface level observations, and misconceptions actually make them a lot less cool than they actually are. Which also, admittedly, Krieg lore has been somewhat inconsistent with how they're depicted. Sometimes they're basically robot men, other times they're callous but still human. The latter being a lot more interesting to me. Not only does it highlight what makes the Guard cool to me, but it's also the tragedy of a million soldiers trying to suppress their humanity to atone for a sin they didn't commit. I think that is so much more interesting than actual automatons. If I wanted mindless automatons, I'd play Suns, Necrons, or even technically Nids. I personally like the Guard because of the humanity and because it's humans standing up to the wackiness of 40k. But I also know different strokes for different folks, so if you like that, good for you. More power to you. But luckily, Krieg fans are masters of attrition and they can weather the endless waves of dumb memes and misunderstandings for the faction. However, all that said, Katie is still number one. Woo! But anyways, that's the Death Corners of Krieg. They're a very cool faction. Not my personal favorite, but I understand the appeal. They have a very cool aesthetic, Endless War is very 40k, and the grim demeanor is interesting. Also, they actually make quite a power couple, the Cadians. Their mastery of attrition would actually complement the Cadians' adaptability and mobility on a galactic level. But anyways, thanks again to Rocket Money for sponsoring this video. Check out the link in the description if you're interested. And thank you for watching, and thank you to all the Patreons who helped me to make these cool videos. Also, I know it's a deathcore of Krieg, but you gotta admit, the slight pun at Death Corpse is pretty cool, and it's funny to mispronounce it, so. Hi friends, it's Orktober, and I'm sure that everyone else is making orc content, so as a loyal Imperial, I must prepare for this onslaught. So today, we're talking about one of my most favorite, and one of the most, if not the most iconic Guard regiments, or at least one point they were, the Steel Legion. The Armageddon Steel Legion is a legendary regiment, especially famed for their formidable mechanized regiments that they owe their namesake to. Throughout the Imperium, mechanized regiments are relatively rare since, for many commanders and governors, it's hard to amass enough vehicles to stock such regiments. Which means, yeah, even in 40k, people are facing stocking issues for their armies. But the Steel Legion gets around this by living on Armageddon, aka Chimera Factory the planet. And Armageddon was once the legendary world of Olenor, but it got teleported across the galaxy by the Mechanicum, don't ask, and eventually became the horrible place that we all know and love. Since then, it has become a highly industrialized hive world with vast factories throughout. And thanks to the pollution of said huge hive cities and vast factories throughout all of Armageddon, the atmosphere of the world is incredibly toxic. So, without proper rebreathers or ventilation, the atmosphere of Armageddon can and will rot the lungs of the people on the world. Which, also, this isn't even really that relevant, but I just wanted to add this here because I'm still scarred from the experience. But I went to a Magic the Gathering store to buy some pretty dice that I saw online, and Jesus Christ, man, it felt like I walked into a Death Guard dinner party in the Armageddon ash wastes. I think my lungs rotted like at least 6% from the mighty stench that I faced. I never actually experienced the smelly 40k store thing for the many years I've been in the hobby. And then the second I walk into a Magic store, I get blasted. But anyways, thanks to this fun little environmental quirk, the people of Armageddon have to wear their stylish gas masks almost constantly. In addition, Armageddon pattern gear and vehicles are also adapted to their evil ass air. Armageddon pattern stuff is often airtight and coated with anti-corrosive paints and sealants. And also, fun fact, even their regimental standards are given proper protective coatings so that they can assert their dominance in typical coolest guy ever fashion. But Armageddon pattern stuff in general is just really good and widely sought after. The people of Armageddon have been manufacturing gear and vehicles for so long that they're incredibly efficient and produce some of the highest quality gear in the Imperium. Due to this, Armageddon Steel Legionnaires are very well supplied. So yeah, beyond being a humongous shithole planet, Armageddon is also one of the most prolific producers of Chimera transports. This means that Armageddon is able to produce hundreds of mechanized regiments, both to defend their home and to serve the Emperor across the galaxy. And their mechanized regiments are some of the best, if not the best, regiments around. Steel Legion mechanized regiments are well renowned for overwhelming their enemies with blistering assaults. The legendary Chimera is a rugged transport that safely delivers guardsmen to key locations and then acts as fire support while guardsmen carry out their objectives and finish off any enemies that survive the initial blitz. Through speed, ambush, and massed firepower, the Steel Legion mechanized infantry is often able to punch above their weight with grenade launchers, missile launchers, and of course, a million lasers! Furthermore, each infantry squad having a personal chimera means that they demonstrate nearly unmatched flexibility due to their ability to rapidly redeploy where needed. Beyond their iconic Chimera squadrons, the Steel Legion also employs artillery and tank regiments to support their mechanized infantry and kill whatever the guardsmen might not be able to. The Steel Legion is also known for employing a lot of stormtroopers. These elite guardsmen are the best Armageddon has to offer and are often set on high-risk operations. Stormtroopers are also a natural match for the massed Chimera assaults since, for relatively the same amount of transport capacity, they bring a lot more firepower and are more resilient thanks to their carapace armor. And then, on the other hand, them having the Chimera means that they can remain highly mobile despite their heavier gear. Plus, Stormtroopers are just badass, so another Armageddon win in the books. Also, coolest dude ever, Captain Andre Valitok, is an Armageddon Stormtrooper, so there's truly no denying that these dudes are badass. Anyways, another somewhat surprising unit that they like to use are the Abhuman Ratlings. I don't really know much more than an old codex saying they like to deploy Ratlings, but Ratlings are known for being mobile sharpshooters, so it's not the most unbelievable thing. Plus, I'm sure you can stuff a bunch of Ratlings in a Chimera thanks to their incredible short person abilities. And so, now we know how they fight good, but who do they fight good? Well, their most hated foes are the Orcs. The Steel Legion's true claim to fame were the massive apocalyptic wars for Armageddon, and at least 2 of the 3-ish, maybe 4 wars for Armageddon were waged against the Greenskins. As such, the Steel Legion is adapted for fighting the Orc menace as well as attrition warfare, as they often have to hold off endless tides of orcs for extended periods of time. Also, another really cool unit that isn't technically Steel Legion but were made on Armageddon are the Armageddon Orc Hunters. These funky warriors were formed shortly after the Second War for Armageddon by combining the ravaged squads from the war into elite orc hunting teams. These teams were then sent into the jungles of Armageddon to cull the orc survivors. At first, they were made up of many disparate guard regiments and couldn't really communicate well due to planetary language barriers, but luckily, the phrase, "kill them all," is a pretty universal concept to guardsmen far and wide. And through many hunts, their new regiment became very adept in fighting the orcs and have even been noted for utilizing looted greenskin weapons. Which, if you know anything about orc weapons, this says a lot about the sheer badassery of these guardsmen. But back to the good old Steel Legion, many of their recruits are taken from the gangs of the planet's hive. This is useful as gangers are conveniently trained in combat from a young age, cause if the children aren't dealing crack and fighting rival gangs, then just who will? But anyways, this in conjunction with the absolutely massive population of Armageddon's hives and their bustling industrial capabilities means that they're able to replenish lost guardsmen at an incredible rate, which should honestly have been quite evident considering they contend with the famously endless orc hordes. But perhaps the ultimate example of this is one of my favorite codex blurbs of the Steel Legion, and honestly one of my favorite blurbs in the whole setting. The Armageddon 339th, known as the Ironheads, forged a legend for themselves in one of Armageddon's great tank forges. This particular tank forge was so massive that a full-scale battle was able to take place within it. This forge was so incredibly huge that basilisk artillery was being used, and both sides fought the same as they would in an open field. But the unfathomably massive superstructure forge isn't even what makes the story great. As the Steel Legion were fending off orcs, the factory workers were assembling tanks and sending them straight to battle. These absolute madmen were LEGO Star Wars building tanks in real time to replenish their ranks, while literally being shot at and charged by orcs. Badass. And there's a bunch of other totally badass Steel Legion moments, but if I described them all, we'd be here all day and I'd run the risk of turning this into a second Yarick video. Which, speaking of, the Steel Legion works with the coolest guy ever, Sebastian Yarick. They are peak. But yeah, that's the Steel Legion. These guys are in a perpetual competition with the Destroyan Firstborn as my third favorite regiment, and I think it's a real shame that Krieg kind of took their spot as cool gas mask guardsmen and as one of the big three guard regiments. I personally feel that the Steel Legion is a lot cooler than Krieg and does the whole evil ass atmosphere and attrition war thing cooler. Which, also, as far as I can tell, the Krieg did technically come out first as they were in the 3rd edition codex, and them originating as Steel Legion repaints is a little bit of a misconception. However, they were essentially a random throwaway guard regiment for a long time, whereas the Steel Legion was explored very in depth in Codex Armageddon, only to later be replaced, and by replaced, I mean literally replaced as apparently the only named guard regiment in Armageddon 4 are the fucking Death Corps of Krieg. What the hell, man? I was hoping that the 4th War for Armageddon would mean the return of the Steel Legion, but I don't even know anymore. But I don't know, I hope they at least do a made to order. I would buy Metal Steel Legion squads so fast. But them getting neglected by GW doesn't detract at all from how cool they are. So, GW can unceremoniously kill all of our cool characters all day, glaze Krieg till the end of time, and I'll still love my yellow gas mask boys, and Yarg is still alive in my heart. But let me know what you think about the Steel Legion. Are they truly the best gas mask boys, or do they deserve to be forgotten like a fart in the Armageddon ash winds? Let me know in the comments, and while you're at it, let me know your favorite guard regiment also. Also, I should say that I don't even hate Krieg, but them being apparently the only guard regiment mentioned in the new Codex Armageddon is really super duper lame. It would be like if they wrote a story set on Krieg, but only talked about Cadians. Actually insane. Anyways, thank you for watching, and thank you to all my awesome patrons who help the channel grow and help me make cool videos. Seriously though, GW, please, oh please do another Steel Legion made to order. I will give you all of my money. I'll even paint them up as Kriegers. I unironically really like the Codex Armageddon Krieg scheme. So please. Hi friends, today we're talking about one of the most, if not the most, legendary heroes of the Imperium, the hero of Hive Hades, old Baelai, the savior of Armageddon, Commissar Sebastian Yarick. Woo! Commissar Yarick is one of the most iconic Imperial Guard characters, and the first one to ever get a proper model. He is a legend among the Imperials and the Orcs, an inspirational leader, and a total badass all around. It all started on a planet called Teos 3 when a little guy called Sebastian Vardine was born. He was born to a wealthy family but was orphaned at a young age, and unlike Harry Potter, his family fortune got taken by the government, so he couldn't buy whimsical little candies and owls. Instead, this little guy was raised by his grandpa Yarick, who was a disgraced Imperial hero of the Guard. Grandpa Yarick was a really nice guy who would pay some thugs to beat up Baz every week so that he would eventually ask for training and stop being a little weenie boy. And it worked! So he brutally taught young Baz combat, survival, and tactical skills to prepare him for the horrors of the galaxy, which would coincidentally come in handy when the Orcs invaded Teos 3 and killed everybody that Sebastian knew, including his nice old grandpa. But little Baz wouldn't go down so easily, so he made hideouts throughout the Hive and used his skills that he learned from his grandpa to survive the Orc invasion for 3 whole years. This insano home alone orcs for 3 years by himself while surviving in a wrecked Hive. At least Macaulay Culkin had a giant house and some playboys. But anyways, after those 3 years, the Imperial Retribution fleet finally arrived and discovered little Sebastian. When discovered, Sebastian took on his grandpa's name to honor him, and thus began the legend of Sebastian Yarick. Impressed by his survival skills, the commissar who found him sent him to the Scala Progenium, which, also luckily for him, the Scala loves orphans more than Disney and Bruce Wayne combined, so at the Scala, Yarick would be trained to be an Imperial Stormtrooper, which really makes it no wonder that he'd become the coolest dude ever someday. But anyways, after some time serving as a Tempestus Scion, Yarick would be placed under the mentorship of Lord Commissar Rasp to train to become a Commissar himself. And he would eventually become a Commissar and lead a relatively unremarkable career, eventually being attached to the Steel Legion Regiment and working with Armageddon PDF as his career came to a close. Notably, though, through his career, he harbored a hatred for the orcs due to his childhood encounter with them, and he would learn as much as he could about their culture and even learn the orcish language. But anyways, on the day of his retirement, the first orcs of a looming Wah arrived on Armageddon. But luckily, instead of tragically dying before he was able to retire, Yarick would forge his legend with the ensuing Second War of Armageddon. Upon hearing word of the incoming orc invasion and the actions of Gazkul Mag Uruk Thraka, Yarick would know from his experience with orcs that Gazkul was smarter than the average orc and could potentially lead an apocalyptic assault on the world. Or, in other words, bring Armageddon to Armageddon. So, he called for an astropathic SOS, but the famously smooth-brained Herman von Straub, overlord of Armageddon, was confident that Armageddon could hold its own against the orc threat, and he banished Yarick to Hive Hades for not respecting him enough. And this unshockingly proved to be a certified moron moment, as almost all of Armageddon fell to the orcs in record time. Only Hive Hades stood as Yarick had shaped the guardsmen and the hivers into a formidable defense force and turned the hive into a fortress city in preparation of the orc menace. And this is where Yarick truly became a legend. At Hive Hades, Yarick would lead from the front, belting out rousing speeches and performing daring acts of heroism in order to inspire his men to hold the line against the Green Tide. He was such a brilliant and inspiring leader that it's said that no guardsman broke morale during the entire defense of Hive Hades. And despite being a mega old man and being vastly outnumbered and outgunned, Yarick slew all the orcs who challenged the hive with bolter and chainsword. Yarick was such a ferocious fighter that the orcs began to fear the old man and told legends of an unkillable Yumi who shined fire from his face and stole strength from death. So, as the rumors and tall tales spread among the orcs, Gazkul would send his toughest war boss, Ugelhard, to slay the troublesome Yumi and kill his legend and his hive. The massive war boss killed his way towards Yarick and faced him in a legendary duel. After trading blows and losing an arm, Yarick found an opening and decapitated the raging beast. In his triumph, he raised the claw of the slain war boss high in the sky, emboldening his men and causing the remaining orcs to flee in terror. And this was an absolutely insane feat. Not only was Yarick a regular human, but he was also literally over 100 years old. Being able to defeat one of the strongest war bosses in single combat is incredible when war bosses are the strongest orcs and can pretty easily kill space marines and other big threats. And Yarick, perhaps more than any other Imperial, understood the orc culture and mindset. He understood the power of belief and legend, both in orcs and the Imperium. So he allowed himself to become the monster that the orcs believed him to be, and the rumors became reality as Yarick fully embodied the myth. Yarick had the orc claw fitted in place of his lost arm, stealing the strength of a war boss. He got a cybernetic laser eye so he could literally kill with a glance, and he got a storm bolter, one of the biggest shooters he could, to unleash a rain of death upon all who opposed him. Yarick would defend the hive until Imperial reinforcements finally arrived to beat the orcs back. He even survived a face-to-face fight with Gazkul himself. And after the war, he was celebrated as the savior of Armageddon as his stalwart defense was critical in the Imperial reinforcements arriving to reclaim the planet from the orcs. Yarick was now one of the greatest heroes of the Imperium, and his feats were told across the Imperium to inspire other Imperials. A living legend, Yarick denied any promotions or honorary positions in order to prepare for another encounter with Gaskell. And 3 years after the war, Yarick prepared his forces to hunt down the Prophet. Concluding his hunt, he would face a large orc force on Golgotha, which would eventually lead to his capture. And after a failed slave revolt, Yarick was adorned in his gear and brought before Gaskell. And in an unexpected move, Gaskell allowed him to go free to prepare for his second invasion of Armageddon because he respected the legendary commissar and proclaimed, "Good enemies is hard to come by." And a formidable foe like Yarick would make the battle more fun. And so, Yarick was made supreme commander of Armageddon and led his force against Gaskell's green tide from his personal Baneblade, the Fortress of Arrogance. And the third war for Armageddon was even bigger and more insano than the second. Yarick's mere presence would strike fear in the orcs, and his brilliant command would hold off the endless hordes long enough for Gaskell to get bored and leave the planet. And after the war, Yarick would immediately hunt down Gaskell with the Steel Legionaries and High Marshal Helbrecht's Crusader fleet. And they were able to eventually find the war boss, but he was able to escape into the warp, preparing for another great war. And that was the last Yarick was ever heard of. Until the super totally cool and awesome 9th edition Guard update that I totally love. The legend had finally returned, and he got one page saying that he died. They didn't say how or anything. No glorious fights with Gaskell, no heroic last stand, not even a fun little office retirement party. One of the greatest Imperial heroes and most iconic 40k characters just written off in a single page. Yay. I mean, at least he got a page before disappearing, I guess. But they do leave it somewhat vague, so it's a possibility that they have plans for the future. I think Yarick coming back at some point as a Imperial spirit or something would be kind of hokey, and I think that Gaskell hunting down Angron for killing Yarick, I think that theory is just super dumb. Imperial records are famously misinformed, though, and this wouldn't be the first time a legendary commissar was falsely reported dead, and even though they seemingly have his skeleton, that could also just be a ceremonial double if he was, like, missing or something. And also, like, don't come at me with the, it's realistic for an old man to die, or unceremonious deaths are realistic in war. Warhammer isn't a fucking history book, you know? Realism doesn't matter if it steps on the toes of a satisfying narrative. Stories are inherently unrealistic, and plots are made to be entertaining tales first and foremost. Yarick dying with no explanation doesn't add anything significant to his narrative, and if they really wanted to shelve him, like a vague passage about how he's missing, but there's rumors of a warrior fighting across the galaxy with a burning eye or something, I think that would do that, and it would also fit his narrative and themes of legends and symbols, you know? But again, there is certainly a chance that they have further plans, so I wouldn't be too wound up yet, and it is written in a way that allows for you to headcanon a ton of things, which is kind of nice. But also, fake out deaths in fiction are some of the most annoying tropes ever to me, so I really hope it's not just that, and it wasn't just a cheap setup for a surprise return. But anyways, back to a live Yarick. Yarick, beyond being a total badass, is, in a way, the most idealized version of a commissar. People often forget it, but commissar's primary duty is to ensure loyalty, morale, and discipline is present among guard regiments, as well as being inspirational warriors. Their job is not to blast guardsmen for the funsies. And Yarick does this duty perfectly. At his peak, Yarick is able to inspire his men, raise morale, and guarantee loyalty just by being a total badass. Like, why would you defy the Emperor when the most badass dude in the entire world is giving his all to fight for the Emperor's glory? Oftentimes, Yarick doesn't even need to shoot his own men, as his heroism is far more encouraging than a friendly fire incident. He also fully understands how to weaponize faith, and his impassioned words alone are a force multiplier in and of itself. Plus, he has a goddamn laser eye, crab claw, and Terminator gun. You'd be a moron not to respect his presence. And beyond being the perfect commissar, he's also basically the perfect enemy to the orcs. He understands orc culture and the power of their superstition very well, and he totally plays into that. He became the boogeyman that the orcs believed he was, and he was all the more threatening for it. Along with his outward badassery, there is an air of silliness to Yarick. Who else but Yarick would hear orc tall tales and say, okay, yeah, sure, I could do that, and get a gosh darn laser death eye? I bet if the orcs thought that Yarick had an impenetrable Hawaiian shirt of doom, you'd find Yarick at the local Tommy Bahama preparing to kill some greenskins. Knowingly or not, Yarick does kind of tap into the orc psychic gestalt, and to what extent is unknown, but it's undeniable that Yarick is one of the most accomplished and formidable humans in the entire setting. The mere fact that he, as an ordinary guy, is largely considered by the orcs as an equal to the literal prophet of the wall, Gaskell Mag Uruk-Thraka, should speak for itself. But yeah, that was Yarick, one of the greatest, if not the greatest, heroes of the Imperium. And as a massive Imperial Guard simp, Yarick is of course one of my favorite characters. I like Kane a little bit more, but Yarick's sheer badassery cannot be overlooked. Plus, he has a laser eye and orc power claw. Coolest shit ever! One of my biggest regrets is not picking up the classic Yarick model at my local store when they had him. I love the latest model of him, but the crab claw and banner are just so fun. I would have loved to paint it. I'm sure I'll get it one day, but I gotta find a good deal. But anyways, let me know what you think about Yarick, and of the 3 big commissars, who's your favorite? Be sure to comment your thoughts below and whatever else you have to say about Yarick. Anyways, thank you for watching, and big thanks to the patrons who help support the channel. You're all very epic. People wanted Cherry to return, but he's stuck in Comra, guys. We need to send someone to save him or something. Hi friends, Catachan are some of the most badass sons of guns in the setting. Each Catachan is an 80s action hero in their own right. So what kind of crazy insane things do you have to do to be a hero amongst heroes and be considered a notable Catachan? And also get a model, of course, the true sign of importance in 40k. And a little spoiler, they're pretty insane. So today I'll be talking about some notable Catachan, as well as a little rapid fire, funny, crazy Catachan list at the end, so stay tuned. Let's start this off with the man himself, one of the deadliest warriors of Catachan, if not the deadliest. Colonel Ironhand Strachan is the commander of the Catachan 2nd Green Vipers, and has an iron hand to match his iron nutsack. While he was born with the iron nuts, Strachan didn't have his titular iron hand, or more accurately, iron arm, pec, half abdomen, and of course nipple, until a fateful encounter with a Muriel land shark. Muriel land sharks are 25-foot, jungle-dwelling beasts that burrow through the soil and ambush their prey. These land sharks' teeth can tear straight through ceramite, and they're able to easily fell space marines. But Strachan's no space marine, he's a Catachan! Strachan got attacked by one of these sharks when he was battling some Eldar, and in the scuffle his arm got torn off and he got swallowed whole. But dumbass shark should have went for the head, because from the inside of the beast, Strachan ripped the shark's throat out with his teeth, climbed out, went on his merry way, and got a badass robot arm after it was all blown over. And Mr. Strachan has some of the most insane feats for any character in the setting, let alone a minorly augmented human. He regularly goes head to head with other factions, best of the best, and he comes out on top. Notably, he defeated a Dark Elder Archon in a duel, which are some of the most formidable melee combatants in a faction of formidable melee combatants. He strangled a Hive Tyrant to death after blowing halfway to hell, Hive Tyrants being some of the deadliest Tyranid bioforms, if not the deadliest. And he also got in a gorilla off with famous Orc Commando Snickrot. This culminated in a duel in which Strachan eventually won by knocking Snickrot off a building, leaving the Orc heavily wounded. After doing that, he went on to kill a flipping Orc war boss. He did this by tackling the Hulkin war boss Kilzar off a Squiggoth and getting the both of them stepped on. Being Strachan, of course he survived getting stomped on by the gargantuan Squiggoth and was saved by none other than Sly Marbo. But Strachan isn't just notable for his extremely impressive combat record, he's also just kind of a cool-ass dude. Unlike many other guard commanders, Strachan is not a fan of sending his guardsmen to needlessly die en masse just for the hell of it. Strachan's respect and care for his troop means that they're extremely loyal to him and will do whatever is necessary to save him if need be. The aforementioned Landjaws encounter is just one instance where Strachan was grievously wounded but survived. When Strachan is given a fatal wound, he just laughs as a new slot just opened up for him to put some more badass robot parks on. Along with being an Iron Man, or more accurately, Man of Adamantium, Strachan is also a tactical genius, truly brains and brawn. This, in addition to his attitude towards the guardsmen who serve under him, means that he really looks down upon commanders who don't respect their troopers and stupidly sacrifice waves of troops for technically inept charges or worthless moves. Then, just when you thought Strachan couldn't get any cooler, his Green Vipers regiment is also known for disregarding their dorky Imperial superiors, even more so than other notoriously independent Catachan. And said superiors can't do jack shit about it because Strachan and the boys are just too damn cool. Strachan really embodies the maverick action hero shtick more so than any other Catachan in my opinion, even more so than the one you're thinking of. He has the bombastic feats. He disrespects authority if need be. And he has that classic no man left behind style of heroics. He's truly the coolest dude ever. Moving on to one of the deadliest warriors of Catachan, if not the deadliest, Gunnery Sergeant Stonetooth Harker is the leader of an elite squad at Catachan Devil. Woo! Catachan Kazarkin, let's go! Woo! Catachan Devil are the Catachan's elite of the elite and emulate the vicious Catachan Devil in both name and ferocity. These devils specialize in infiltration, tracking, and destroying whatever foe may face them. But yes, Harker leads his Catachan Devils, the Hellraisers, into deadly engagements deep behind enemy lines, laying traps and raising hell to prepare for the main army's arrival. Harker's main claim to fame is his legendary strength and hardness. Even stronger and harder than the already extremely strong and hard Catachan, Harker also has an extremely impressive weapon. Harker's incredible strength and size allows him to wield a heavy bolter called Payback, the same way a normal guardsman would wield a rifle. To most normal people, holding a heavy bolter by themselves would be impossible, and firing without a mount would be even more impossibler and probably break every bone in their body. Ooh, owies. Harker got his iconic weapon when he was just a wee little, hugely muscled recruit. His platoon was patrolling the death world of Oriya Osetsi looking for some holy spaghetti when they came across a warband of blood axes. The orcs ambushed the platoon and slaughtered everyone but Harker. Harker was able to survive the initial onslaught and he held his ground. He gunned down so many orcs that his lasgun had burnt out harder than I did in my college bio major. He ditched his rifle and picked up the heavy bolter from a nearby dead heavy weapons team, and through the flames of his fallen brothers, Harker blasted the rest of the orcs with his new gun, aptly named Payback. With his huge gun and even huger muscles, he's truly the coolest dude ever. Another sergeant who's one of the deadliest warriors of the Catachan, if not the deadliest, Sergeant Ripper Jackson is a force to be reckoned with. Both jacked and ripped, she is ferocious with her chainsword and bolter. She uses her tremendous Catachan strength to rush into battle, shooting a bolter in one hand and chopping Xenos with a chainsword in the other. Contrary to popular belief, her name is not from any relation to a popular murderer and lunatic, Jack the Ripper, nor is it related to chronic flatulence. It is actually from the time she fought a Necron Immortal and ripped its necrodermis apart with her bare hands, and then dropped an epic action hero one-liner. Ah, not so mortal now, are you? In fact, you really quite live up to the necro part of your name, seeing as I, Sergeant Ripper Jackson, has lived up to the Ripper part of my name, and I have ripped you asunder and you are now dead! Ha! However, she does have a famous ancestor. She is rumored to be the direct descendant of President Andrew Jackson, who is most famous for his appearance on that funny green paper that you give to your friend when you forgot to buy them a birthday present. Additionally, I completely lied about all of this, and Sergeant Ripper Jackson has pretty much no lore at all. Sorry, I hope that no one feels ripped off by this little fib. But with her cool-ass name, cool-ass sculpt, and cool-ass lack of lore, she's truly the coolest dude ever. Alright, enough jorking around. It's time for the main attraction. Let's talk about the actual deadliest warrior of Catachan. Let's talk about Mr. himself. Sly Marbo is the ultimate badass of 40k, a literal one-man army based on classic action heroes such as Rambo and Rambo from the first movie. Mr. Marbo is a Catachan devil that works alone to do whatever is needed to benefit the Imperium. From hunting down enemy leaders to destroying entire armies, Sly Marbo can do and kill it all. Like all Catachan, Sly is an expert in guerrilla warfare and is able to seemingly disappear into the environment, laying traps and emerging to silently kill whatever he feels like. Gulp? He's right behind me, isn't he? What did you say, Jeff? Jeff? Marbo excels in pretty much every form of combat, but he's especially good at sniping, having skills that rival Vindicare assassins, which is insane if you know anything about Imperial assassins. However, despite his excellent sniping skills, his most iconic weapons are his Ripper Pistol and Envenom Blade. The Ripper Pistol is an auto pistol forged by Sergeant Ripper Jackson using the metal of the immortal she famously killed. All right, I'm just kidding. That's another Jackson lie. The Ripper pistol is actually a modified auto pistol that shoots special armor piercing rounds that are tipped with venom. The venom is extremely potent and can kill the huge fauna of Catachan as well as the huge threats in the galaxy, including Astartes. So, along with the penetration, very few enemies can survive a salvo from a Ripper pistol. And if something does happen to survive the Ripper pistol and it foolishly thinks it'll be safer closing in on Sly, well, they've got another thing coming. Namely, Sly's Envenom Blade. The blade is, as the name suggests, envenomed, and it's just as deadly as the Ripper rounds, especially since Sly Marble is a total melee menace, being described as a mini orc. And that's probably mini in the same way as a minigun, considering Sly Marble can probably kill an entire orc wall with just his pinky toe and a brown Lego stud. One time, Sly Marble painted an entire army in a single night. Then he woke them up and killed all those green world eaters. Okay, that is the dumbest Sly Marble joke ever. Just take it out. It doesn't even really make sense. But the memes aren't completely wrong. Sly Marble has done some wild things. If you thought the other Catachan's feats were crazy insano, well, you'd be right. But Sly Marble's feats are even more crazy and even more insane-er. Remember how it was a big deal that Strachan killed an Archon? Well, one time a Dark Eldar force attacked a garrison of Catachan and brutally tortured the poor guardsmen. But after a few nights, Sly Marble broke loose and killed every single Dark Eldar there. That included witches, mandrakes, and of course the Archon. These units are some of the deadliest single combatants in all of 40k, so Marble killing a small army of them single-handedly is nuttier than a Petra Squirrel steamy mud pie. And this isn't even Marble's craziest victory. Although his origins aren't completely known, one story is that Marble and his 9 brothers fought together on Ryza against an orc wall. Marbo's whole regiment was slain, but Marble returned to the Imperial command weeks later with the head of the war boss. This dude leaves boot camp and then fights through an army of orcs to single-handedly kill its war boss. And then some more quickfire feats for Marbo. It's said that the destruction he causes is comparable to Space Marine strike forces, and it's almost incomprehensible to enemy commanders that a single man could wreak such havoc. Another time, Marbo killed an entire Xenos camp with just a tin can, and he probably only used a tin can to give some mercy to the Xenos since his bare fist would have been far too efficient. Oh yeah, and one time Sly Marble took down a freaking Bane Lord Titan. A Titan! You know, the walking building guys with sun guns? Yeah, he took one of those down by himself somehow. Knowing him, he probably crafted Titan-sized sneakers out of some leaves, sticks, and shoe juice, sneakily put them on the Titan, tied the laces together so that the Titan would trip and fall, so then he could slit its titanic throat up close. Yes, they finally let me pilot the Titan. Things are looking up, Chaos Goon. Wait, what's that? Holy shit, no, 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 no! Even crazier, Sly Marble almost always works alone since having anyone help him would almost certainly just slow his slaughterings down. Sly Marble is also a bit of a shy Marble at times as he has trouble connecting with others and he can only feel comfortable when brutally killing something. And this segues into what I think is actually a really interesting facet of the character. Marble is an insane killing machine. And that insane part is no joke. Like I said before, Marbo is both action hero, one-man army Rambo, and mentally unwell, PTSD, all my friends are dead Rambo. After the insane bloodshed Marbo has endured, both at the enemy's hand and his own, he has become mentally scarred and unsettlingly aloof. He is described with a deep sadness and emptiness about him when he's not in combat, and he avoids most human interactions. Marbo is almost completely silent and just waits until his commanders give him a task. Once given orders, Marbo pulls a Batman disappearing act and does whatever mission he's given with flying colors. Those colors often being various shades of red. Sly Marbo is just the best, both canonically and in my heart. I just love how over the top he is, I love his competence, and I love how he actually does have some mental conflict to contrast his perfect abilities. It's awesome flavoring that plays into a somewhat unexpected action hero trope. He's truly the coolest dude ever. But before we go, let me quickly talk about a few more relatively obscure Catachan and their feats. Catachan Arden is a trooper who is most notable for his melee acumen. He refused to learn how to operate a lasgun as he preferred to use a Devil Claw's blade. His sergeant really tried to get him to learn how to shoot, but a week later he just filed a report saying, never mind. Arden's claim to fame was that he single handedly held back a branch of an orc horde. He was said to have bested 23 orcs in melee combat, which is nutty, and Arden's also apparently illiterate, which is fine since he's here to make 'em bleed, not to read. Then, this next one's probably the least obscure and will probably be in the Ogre and Funny Moments video that my Discord wants, but might never happen. Nork Daddog is a genius. By Ogre standards, that is. So he's probably slightly smarter than the people who say 40k isn't a satire. He is unquestionably loyal and extremely good at garden bodies. He's even stronger than the average Ogre, one-time killing an orc war boss with a single headbutt. Like, damn, Strachan needed to get stepped on by 1998 Godzilla to kill a war boss. And Nork, he just gets his big head in there. And finally, my favorite of these guys, Colonel Deathstrike, commander of the Catachan 183rd. He earned his nickname as a sergeant since he is statistically 88% as effective as the average Deathstrike missile, which, if lore-wise, is absolutely insane since Deathstrike missiles are intercontinental ballistic missiles of mass destruction that are usually used to completely annihilate armies. And if we're going by tabletop, then the colonel probably got his name after his first girlfriend found his huge missile. Disappointing. But please let me know if anyone knows any info on this guy, because being 88% as effective as a fucking ICBM has to be the funniest thing I've ever seen. But yeah, those are some of the coolest dudes ever and their wacko feats. Cadans are my favorite regiment, but most of my favorite guard characters are Catachan. And I don't care if it's silly or unrealistic that these humans can pull off these feats, and I don't care if they may or may not be legends. They're just so damn cool to me. Plus, the fact that these feats are even contentious in the lore tells me that these dudes are at least believed to potentially be able to do such things, which is insane in itself. But with that, thank you everyone for watching. Let me know what your favorite Catachan are, and please let me know if there's any other cool Catachan moments I may have missed or didn't have time to put into the video. And thank you to all the patrons who help support the channel and help me to make videos and improve the quality of my videos. I really appreciate it. 88%, man. Like, how do you even calculate that? Like, is it just death tool? Did they consider the cost? Because, like, that would make him even more insane, right? Someone please do the math. I love Colonel Deathstrike. Hi friends, the Guard is my absolute favorite faction in all of 40k, obviously. I just really love the idea of humanity standing up against and overcoming any challenges the universe throws at them. Be it horrific aliens or literal hellspawns, the Guard are able to face foes far, far more mighty than themselves. And another cool aspect of the Guard are the diverse regiments. Not only do these look super cool, but they also strengthen the theme of the Guard. Each regiment has a myriad of influences, both fictional and real, and as a whole, the Guard really represent all the cultures of humanity coming together to kick some alien ass. I just think that the Guard's constant plight against superior foes and overwhelming odds is so relatable to the human condition, and really the Guard represent us. The Space Marines might be the poster boys of 40k, but the Guard is you and me. And all that Independence Day inspirational human stuff was to segue into today's topic. I thought it'd be really interesting to look into the influences of some of the most iconic Guard regiments. I'll be looking into the lore and aesthetic of a few Guardsmen and then present some of the influences I was able to find, both historical and from pop culture and fiction. Do keep in mind I'm not a historian, but I will try my best to keep all of my information factual, and let's get into it. So first off, let's start with the internet's favorite Guard regiment, the Death Corps of Krieg. The Death Corps are masters of siege tactics and attrition warfare. They often fight in trenches and use their overwhelming numbers in siege regiments to destroy enemy defenses at all costs. Additionally, they make heavy use of artillery barrages and tank regiments. They're excellent warriors, and they're said to be one of the best, if not the best, Guard regiment in the entire galaxy. Death Corps are defined by their extreme willingness to sacrifice themselves for the cause. And this does not mean that they're suicidal. With the trench warfare angle and their general aesthetic, the Krieg are heavily inspired by World War I. What? Many battles of the First World War were miserable battles of attrition, where soldiers would slowly advance through battlefields and utilize vast trenches for defense. Furthermore, on the Western Front of World War I, there's the idea of the cult of offensive, in which many military strategists believed that an overwhelming offense would be able to overtake any defense. This idea led to the huge casualty rates of World War I and are very reminiscent of the Krieg combat doctrines. Mass infantry assaults with huge casualties are also infamously reminiscent of the Russian war tactics. Also, the silly ass shovel memes come from how in World War I, soldiers would use melee weapons to fight charging opponents, including trench clubs, bayonets, and yes, shovels. However, this doesn't mean that they're all using shovels as their primary weapon. That's just ridiculous. And then culturally, the Krieg are a bunch of antisocial, vat grown freaks who like to hide their face. So, in that regard, I guess it would be based on me. Oh, I made myself sad. There's also the nuclear apocalypse thing going on for them. Cold War anxieties of a nuclear holocaust were fully realized on the great world of Krieg, and they presently live in underground bunkers and stuff. And I know there's a lot of fiction about underground nuclear bunkers, but I just watched the show and I've been on a bit of a Fallout kick, so I'm gonna say that's what influenced the Kriegers. Either that or Hans Moleman, king of the mole people. The culture of atonement is also a somewhat common theme in fiction, where characters feel the need to atone for their sins of their ancestors or religiously devote themselves to a cause. Then, on an aesthetic level, Kriegers have many elements of different World War armies. Their combat uniform is basically one-to-one with French soldiers, and then their helmets are German-style helms. Then, finally, to me, their gas mask looks most similar to the British small box respirator due to the, well, small box. It can also be inspired by the German GM-24 mask from World War II. In addition to their uniforms, the Krieg weapons and vehicles also have a more antiquated aesthetic than most other regiments. For example, the Lucius pattern lasgun has a rifle grip that's unlike the more common pistol grips of 40k guns. And it's also said to have a lower rate of fire, making it resemble older rifles even more. Alright, next up, bust out the Fortunate Son because we're going to the jungles, baby. The Catachan Jungle Fighters are a formidable guard regiment that hail from the jungle death world of Catachan. The Jungle Fighters are masters of jungle warfare, obviously, and excel in guerrilla strikes and asymmetric warfare. The Catachan are stone-cold badass muscle men who love bandanas and knives. They're excellent warriors and they're said to be one of the best, if not the best guard regiment in the entire galaxy. Now, the obvious influence of Catachan are 80s action heroes mixed with some Vietnam War elements. The most iconic Catachan model is literally a mix of Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone, and Kurt Russell. Their aesthetic heavily resembles the characters from movies like Predator, Rambo, and even Aliens. And then the attitude and personality of Catachan are also reminiscent of action movies. The Catachan are often big dicking each other, trying to prove who's the most badass. And this is a lot like in the movies and even real life, where stars like Arnold Schwarzenegger or Sylvester Stallone would compete with each other to see whose muscles could be the most epically roided. And then another trope in some of these movies is like a nerdy outsider guy who tags along with the team and is generally disrespected and disliked. Catachan often disrespect authorities and outsiders, so much so that when the crew eat the Catachan, they start disrespecting their leaders and wearing bandanas, which is pretty funny and kind of insane. Another way that movie tropes in history influence the Catachan is on the planet of Catachan itself. In adventure movies and action movies, a hostile, exotic land is a very common place for adventurers to go. Things like Skull Island and Lost World feature exotic fauna and flora that are very hostile and will probably eat you. And this has very likely inspired the insane residents of Catachan. This trope was born because jungles in real life are very dangerous and often relatively unexplored. Not only are there the natural dangers, but during conflicts like the Vietnam War, combatants familiar with the jungles would set many traps and ambushes. And like the memes say, the trees are speaking Vietnamese, and on Catachan, the trees are speaking murderese because, they'll murder and eat you. Tactically speaking, the Catachan often employ guerrilla stealth strikes. They like laying traps and they also favor close combat. The jungle guerrilla fighting style and trap making is very similar to Viet Congs who opposed the Americans in the Vietnam War. The Viet Congs had tunnel systems, booby traps, and were experts in navigating the jungles. However, the Catachan also had some strategies that aligned with Americans in the Vietnam War. In Vietnam, Americans heavily utilized bombing runs, napalm strikes, and ground teams to kill the North Vietnamese. Likewise, the Catachan also used mechanized supports and flamers to clear out jungles and then deploy infantry squads to eradicate enemies. So now finally, let's talk about my favorite regiment, the Canadian Shock Troopers. They're an elite guard regiment that is very professional and often seen as a template for other regiments to aspire to. They utilize combined arms tactics and are a very versatile regiment, fighting very well on nearly every war front. They're excellent warriors, and they're said to be one of the best, if not the best, guard regiment in the entire galaxy. Canadians are mostly a mix of North American soldiers, both Canadian and United States, with some other flavorings mixed in. A big inspiration for the Canadian Shock Troopers is the Canadian Shock Troopers. Wait a minute. Contrary to the syrup drinking, friendly hockey personas that the Canadians have today, the Canadians of the World Wars were actually pretty scary and very effective soldiers. One notable tactic they employed in the First World War was utilizing the aforementioned shock troops. In the time of trench warfare, their shock troops used combined arms tactics to flank and break enemy defenses. Acadians often utilize shock tactics, combined arms doctrines, and other modern military strategies. Along with the combined arms approach, Acadians are also trained in smaller squad formations, guerrilla warfare, and urban combat. This is reminiscent of modern American doctrines as well as other contemporary militaries. The professional military theme is also similar to Americans, as our military is very well funded and equipped for squad combat on an infantry level. Another cultural influence for the Acadians may be Spartan legends and stories. Although historians debate if Spartans were actually the elite warrior society that people perceive them as, the stories and general perception of Spartans is that of a meritocratic warrior society. Acadians have clear parallels to this archetype, as most Acadian society is militarized, Acadian children are trained before they could even read, and moving up in Acadian leadership is mostly merit-based. Additionally, the Acadians holding the line at the Acadian Gate is very reminiscent of the legendary 300 holding the line at the Battle of Thermopylae. So the Acadians are basically the love child of the two northmost American countries, who was then kidnapped and raised in Sparta. No wonder they're my favorite. Then, on an aesthetic level, the Acadians really embody the generic sci-fi Marine look. They look quite similar to some iconic sci-fi troopers of the 80s and 2000s-ish. They bear similarities to Colonial Marines from Aliens, movie Starship Trooper Mobile Infantry, and Marines from Halo. I'm sure there's more, but those were the ones I found most significant. I personally think that they look most similar to the Halo Marines, with the blocky armor and large pauldrons. However, many people say that they look most like Starship Troopers. And then branching off of that, Acadians also resemble these troops' personalities to a degree. Acadians are often said to have a gallows humor about them. This is similar to the Marines in those movies and games I mentioned, where they'll often banter with each other or make jokes about how they're all gonna die. Acadian? More like K-Dyin, am I right? Yeah, you can shoot me now? And then, if you had any doubts about Acadians being Space Americans, I just have two things to say. Number one, the Acadians basically had a Space 9/11 pulled on them. Acadia stands as essentially the Guard equivalent of Never Forget. And then two, the Acadians have a great love for their homeworld, and they see themselves as the best of the best, better than anybody else. Totally proving that they're Space Americans. And with that, let's close it off. If you guys like this video, I'd love to make it into a series. It was really interesting to research both the fictional and real-life historical influences of these three regiments. Unfortunately, I was only able to cover the three most popular regiments. However, I would love to do a similar deep dive into the Vostroyans or Steel Legions or whatever. And so, let's do that stupid YouTuber thing and say, oh, if this video gets 2,000 likes, I'll continue the series. Secret, I'll probably continue the series eventually anyways. I love the Guard, and I absolutely love all the regiments. I really wish GW would bring back the regiment models. Those were some of my favorites of all time. And with that, please let me know if you enjoyed this video. Let me know what your favorite Guard regiment is and why. Tell me if I missed any other influences and why I'm a silly goose. Hi friends, much like a guardsman, the arbitrary like threshold that I set for a part 2 of my guard series got absolutely annihilated. So, today I get to talk about my favorite faction ever and look into another 3 awesome guard regiments. Both their general lore and some historical and pop culture influences. And keep in mind, I'm not a historian, so it's possible and honestly very likely I'll miss something or even, God forbid, get something wrong. And if I do, please send a strongly written letter and/or leave a comment below. Let's get into it. So first off, my stand-up teacher told me that 1, this class wasn't a course on how to avoid a sedentary lifestyle, and 2, more relevant to this video, he also told me that the rule of 3 is very important. So boom! This video is actually the third part of the Armageddon series. Let's go, baby! So, from part 2, Gaskell left the planet with Yarick hot on his tail. Things were about to get real steamy. No, I'm just kidding, but we will be talking about the Armageddon Steel Legion. The Armageddon Steel Legion obviously comes from the world of Armageddon Armageddon. The Steel Legion is most notable for their mechanized infantry doctrines. They're excellent warriors and are said to be one of the best, if not the best, guard regiments in the entire galaxy. The planet of Armageddon is one of the key producers of the Chimera, the Guard's primary armored personnel carrier, and due to this, the Steel Legion has a disproportionately high access to these vehicles for its regiments. This is also why they're called the Steel Legion. I mean, it's definitely more catchy than the first option, the Armageddon Chimera APC Legions. The mechanized infantry approach allows the Steel Legionnaires to rapidly attack enemies and remain very mobile. The Chimeras often break through enemy lines, taking out foes with multi-lasers, flamers, and bolters, and then the guardsmen disembark to kill stragglers and secure objectives. The Steel Legion is also very adept in fighting orcs due to the endless wars going on in their home world. So, let's get into the influences. This one's pretty easy. It is very apparent that the Steel Legion are heavily inspired by the Death Corps of Krieg, and are kind of just lazy recolors. Do better, GW. Of course, I'm just kidding. The Steel Legion came first and are pretty directly inspired by the World War II Panzer Grenadiers, which were the German mechanized infantry of World War II. The Panzer Grenadiers would fight alongside an armored vehicle that would provide cover fire and help rapidly transport troops. Hi, Crackduck. Oh, hi, Deja Vu. Aesthetically speaking, the Steel Legion wear uniforms that have inspirations from World War II. They're often depicted with helmets that resemble German paratrooper helmets, and by resemble, I mean match one to one, and sometimes they're seen wearing helmets reminiscent of German style helms, and by reminiscent, I mean match one to one. In addition to the helmets, they also obviously wear trench coats, which have been pretty synonymous with the World Wars. Soldiers in the World Wars wore trench coats not only because they look cool as hell, but also because the coats were effective at keeping the wearers safe from the harsh elements that they faced. And so the Steel Legion also wore trench coats due to the harsh environments of their home world Armageddon. However, their trench coats are a little bit more extreme. If the constant warfare wasn't enough to make you cancel your Armageddon resort booking, the planet is also known for its horrible, horrible ecosystems. Due to the extreme industrialization and massive amounts of pollution, this lovely place has the burning waste, the frozen waste, the boiling seas, deadly jungles, and more. If you can think it, Armageddon can ruin it. So, going back to the clothes, regular lame ass trench coats usually just protect against lame ass things like water and the weather. But Steel Legion trench coats are resistant to those things as well as the toxic environments of their home sweet home Armageddon. In addition to the horrible landscapes, the air of Armageddon is also very toxic due to the rampant pollution. So, in that regard, I guess Armageddon is partially based on LA. But this horrible, no good, very bad air means that the guardsmen need to wear gas masks when on the battlefield, lest their lungs burn and wither away. But everybody, let's take a moment to just thank Armageddon for being so gosh darn terrible, because the Steel Legion uniform looks fucking rad as hell. Also, this Steel Legionnaire has a trench coat, an edgy skull mask, and a space katana, so he'd be based on Redditors. Actually, katanas would traditionally have a curved edge, and the specimen you presented is far too straight, and additionally. Ah! Next up, let's talk about the Talarn Desert Raiders. Again, the Talarn Desert Raiders are primarily a mechanized infantry regiment that hail from a planet known for its wastelands. The Desert Raiders specialize in opportunistic, guerrilla tactics, and tank combat. They're excellent warriors and said to be one of the best, if not the best, guard regiments in the entire galaxy. I've already talked about mechanized infantry twice in this video so far, so just rewatch those parts if you forgot, but mentally replace Steel Legion or German with Talarn. Cool. Next up, another combat doctrine that the Talarn emphasizes is the idea of stealth, swiftness, and the killing blow. These are basically just the principles of guerrilla warfare and have been used by many groups in history. As for their kit, the Talarn wore a distinctive desert combat uniform of loose cotton garments, headscarves, and canvas boots. Headscarves like these, also called keffiyeh, were invented and used by the Bedouin to protect against the harsh sun and dust of the Arabian desert. The Bedouin were a nomadic Arab people who were known for adapting to harsh deserts and being very mobile. Kind of reminds me of a certain guard regiment. In addition to the aesthetics of the Talarn's clothing, they also have some Arabic style weapons. The sergeant's power sword looks similar to a scimitar, and some of them carry daggers that look like jambia, which originated in Yemen. So I have this sneaking suspicion that maybe, just maybe, the Talarn may just at least a little teensy witty bit be inspired by the Bedouin along with some other Arab fighting forces throughout history. But that's just a theory. One of the most notable inspirations people point out are the Arab fighters in the Arab Revolt during World War I, specifically in the case of Lawrence of Arabia. A lot of guard regiments are more so based on a caricaturized pop culture version of historical things, so this interpretation makes sense. The Talon are also somewhat notable for working unusually close with the Eldar, and this may be a bit of a stretch, but working with an outside group is kind of similar to the Arabs and T.E. Lawrence's story. It is also possible that they're partially inspired by the Fremen of Dune. It's no secret that 40k takes a lot of inspiration from Dune, so it makes sense that they'd have a regiment similar to one of the most important Dune factions. The two warriors have similar equipment and general fighting styles. However, it should be noted that it's super likely that these similarities just arose because they share the same historical influences. Also, just wanted to point out these fucking awesome Forge World Mukali riders. They're literally dinosaur riding Tolerant. Coolest shit ever. Alright, enough with the danged mechanized infantry regiments. Let's finally talk about the first, the only, the Tanith first and only. The men of Tanith are a light infantry regiment known for their excellent marksmanship, scouting skills, and plot armor that would make an ultramarine blush. They're excellent warriors and said to be one of the best, if not the best, guard regiment in the entire galaxy. The first and only are all that remains of the Tanith people. When Tanith was first called to create its Astra Militarum regiments for the Imperium, it was attacked by a Chaos fleet. The plan was woefully unprepared for such an invasion, and the legendary Commissar God evacuated as many of his men as possible before the planet was destroyed. The survivors of the planet's fall amounted to about 3,500 guardsmen, and they formed a single regiment called the Tanith First and Only, or Gaunt's Ghosts. Oh, wait, I get it. Ghosts because their planet is dead, and they should also technically be dead. Oh. Although unassuming and often looked down upon due to their seeming lack of discipline and wild dress, the Ghosts are excellent scouts with a naturally strong sense of direction and masters in stealth tactics. Oh, I get it. Ghosts because they can move around unseen, kind of like an invisible ghost. Oh. Some notable features of the Tanith kit are their cute little pins commemorating their lost home, a straight silver dagger, and their iconic camo cloaks. Oh, I get it. Ghost, because they wear sheets like the cheesy Scooby Doo esque sheet ghost. Oh. Alright, that one is a bit of a stretch. A stretch like a stretchy sheet, perhaps? Hmm? Culture wise, the ghosts are mostly based on various aspects of Celtic culture. Most obviously, they have been said to play an instrument known as the Tanith pipes, which are pretty much just space bagpipes. Bagpipes are obviously synonymous with the Scottish people, even though, fun fact, some historians believe that the bagpipes may have originated in Egypt. The Tanith also have some Celtic sounding names and are described as having a sing song accent, which is often used to describe Welsh accents. I've also heard people say that Tanith are depicted with Scottish and Irish accents in the audiobooks, but I haven't personally listened to them, so I can't really confirm this. Additionally, many of the ghosts have Celtic inspired tattoos. Finally, there are some directly confirmed influences by Dan Abnett himself. He said that he based the Ghost books on the Sharp novel series that follows the titular Sharp during the Napoleonic Wars. The Tanith First and Only have some notable similarities to the 95th Rifles of the Sharp series. Namely, both of the regiments are composed of many elite marksmen. There are also other narrative beats, like how Gaunt's story progression mirrors Sharp's in some ways, but I won't delve too deeply into those. The Tanith also carry those silver daggers around, which are presumably quite sharp, so perhaps that's another reference to the Sharp series. Tanith is also inspired by Sharp in the way that, much like Sharp, it's basically just, what if this book series but in blank? What do I mean by this? Well, Sharp is basically, what if the Hornblower books were on land? And Gaunt's Ghost is essentially, what if the Sharp books were in space? So I'm just hoping this leads to a time loop in which a time traveler drops off a Gaunt's Ghost book onto C.S. Forrester's desk and he's like, oh by golly, this is brilliant. What if I wrote this but on the seas? Starting a loop anew. But that's all for these fellas. I hope you like the regiments discussed today. I find all three of them to be very interesting, and I know they're all fan favorites in their own right. I especially like the Steel Legion, but that might just be because I've now spent 3 weeks straight reading about them. Plus, the models really hit that simple but cool aesthetic I really like for the Guard. The Talon are also really cool because they kind of break away from the typical European slash American influence, and it really plays into the idea of the Guard being various cultures across the world banding together to fight all who oppose humanity. You know, small world style. And finally, everyone already knows why the ghosts are cool. It's the bagpipes, obviously. So again, I want a petition for GW to bring back the dang regiments. I know it'll never happen, but if it did, my heart would be very full and my wallet would be very empty. And this actually worked last time, so I'll set a new stupid arbitrary number. If this video gets 10,000 likes or something, I don't know, maybe like 20 if we're gonna go real Insano style, I'll continue the series yet again. So, please let me know what your favorite guard regiment is and what I should cover next. And thank you everyone for watching and supporting the channel. It means a dang world to me. And not like a crappy world like Armageddon or Krieg. Like a cool ass nice world that somebody wants to have, you know? And also, big thanks to my patrons who support the channel a bit extra. Again, I really, really appreciate it, and I have a lot of plans for the future of this channel, so stay tuned. GW's next regiment will be me themed, and their quirk's gonna be having poor self control and eating too much. They're called the Darn Dessert Raiders. Okay, that one was the worst one ever. Hi, friends. Today, we're going to talk about perhaps the coolest thing in the entire setting, which is saying a lot considering that in 40k, 90% of things in the setting were made because some guy said, you know what would be cool? But yeah, if you're a real one, you'd know we're talking the Baneblade. The Baneblade is one of the coolest, if not the coolest tanks in 40k, and in my opinion, it's one of the coolest, if not the coolest tanks in all of fiction. The Baneblade is the go-to super heavy battle tank of the Imperial Guard. It's a 20-foot tall behemoth with 11 barrels of hell and 319 metric tons of heavily armored badassery. And if you're having trouble visualizing it, here's a size comparison next to the average house that someone my age might buy. And here it is next to a house that actually exists. But anyways, today I'll basically just glaze one of my favorite units in the setting for like 10 minutes or so. And of course, I'll cover all of the cool variants too. But anyways, back to the tanks. The Baneblade is one of the oldest tanks used by the Imperium, and unlike avocados, for 40k, old means good. So, the Baneblade is also one of the goodest tanks used by the Imperium. The Baneblade is a fearsome presence on any battlefield, being able to rival Titans. It is a mobile fortress with enough firepower to take on basically any enemy. Its mere presence bolsters the morale of guardsmen in a war zone, and its not so mere guns unbolsters any enemy in said war zone. But despite its effectiveness, the Baneblade is a rare vehicle and is usually only deployed in the most dire war zones since very few regiments have access to a Baneblade, and those who do usually only have one. To have a company of 3 is considered very fortunate. The Baneblade's rarity is largely due to its complexity and the fact that only the most esteemed Forge Worlds even have access to the highly guarded STCs. Which also, funny little fact, thanks to the Baneblade's legendary status and its rarity, there are a lot of counterfeit Baneblades throughout the galaxy. And these counterfeits are presumably made on forgery worlds. But even for legit manufacturers, nearly all are in some way inferior to those made on Mars. Even the ones made on well-known Forge worlds like Ryza are considered second-generation Baneblades and are said to be less sophisticated, less durable, made up of inferior materials, and have a weaker machine spirit. But finally, let's talk about what people came here to hear about, the weapons, baby! The iconic quote is,
"Ready to unleash 11 barrels of hell."
but the Baneblade can actually have up to 18 barrels of hell. 22. What if you just want to be flat out silly ridiculous? Although I guess the jury still stands on if a heavy stubber can really be considered a barrel of hell. But anyways, these barrels of hell are in order of how excited I get rolling the dice. The Baneblade Cannon, the Demolisher Cannon, 6 to 10 heavy bolters, 4 las cannons, a coaxial autocannon, and finally, the wee little heavy stubber for when you whiff the main cannon shot count and you really need to finish off a unit, so you start praying to the Emperor for a strength 4 no AP miracle. And for cramped spaces, or at least as cramped as you can get without Flying Dutch manning it, the Baneblade spawns and bolters can be swapped for heavy flamers. And with all of its guns, the Baneblade is well equipped to take on any foe, and it's a true jack-of-all-trades tank. In the sense that no one in any trade is going to want to compete with Mr. 30-foot cannon. Which, speaking of, the Baneblade cannon shoots giant meter-long rocket-assisted high-explosive anti-tank shells. These shots have tremendous range and destructive capabilities, typically being able to take down enemy tanks in a single shot, and they even fell Titans from time to time. At least in lore. On tabletop, you'll usually whiff your attack number roll, miss 2 out of 3 of your shots, and then realize that AP2 just really isn't enough. And to assist with the aiming and kill things not worthy of unleashing the force of God upon, the Baneblade cannon has a coaxial autocannon. Then, if the main gun's just not enough and a big enemy somehow gets close up, the Baneblade also got a Demolisher cannon to atomize whatever dumb idiot thought that they could sword fight a Baneblade. Which, yes, the Baneblade's secondary weapon is in fact the same one as one of the most devastating main cannons of the Lehman Russ battle tank. In fact, it's even a little better since its rounds are also rocket assisted like the main gun. Then, to clear out those pesky infantrymen, the Baneblade's hull has a twin heavy bolter and a pencil-mounted heavy stubber. And then, when you really want to kill things, the Baneblade could have 4 sponsons, each fitted with twin heavy bolters and a frickin' las cannon. If you do the math, that means 8 additional heavy bolters and a whole lot of murder laser. These are often operated with the assistance of the Baneblade's powerful machine spirit, but they can also be fully crewed. And yes, rolling potentially 54 attacks, even more with sustained and blast, is better than sex. Not that I know after buying 3 of these things, but one can imagine. And on the other end of the getting shot at game, the Baneblade is also no slouch defensively. This thing is literally a mobile fortress in both firepower and armor. Its hull is made of layers of durasteel, ceramite, plasteel, and adamantine. Hell, the tracks are armored in adamantine. Tau rail cannons and Vanquisher rounds are set to ricochet off the Baneblade's hull, and it can even briefly survive a Titan turbo laser blast. Insane. And all that armor is there to protect the precious nuts inside. The Baneblade is the size of a house, and as such, the interior is basically a little house. Baneblade crews are composed of the most trusted and elite tankers, who could only hit on fucking 4s. These crews semi-permanently live in their tank and have a deep connection with it. So much so that it's rumored that some Baneblade crews have intense agoraphobia and, in some extreme cases, actually went insane because of the lack of Baneblade noises. Within the Baneblade, along with the tankers, there's also a special tech adept assigned to each Baneblade to appease the machine spirit and make reports of the Baneblade status to Mars. And there's even a badass Omnissiah shrine on the back of each Baneblade. And now, let me say some cool tidbits before covering the rest of the variants. First off, thanks to the power of sci-fi space magic, the Baneblade can run on any type of fuel. It's fitted with a large array of sensors, making it a great command vehicle. GW, a great command vehicle. Baneblade Tank Commander. Oh, excuse me. I had a little coughing fit at how stupid the Baneblade rules are right now. But finally, each Baneblade has a cool little record shrine inside of it, and it recounts the tank's history, feats, and victories, and then it reports to Mars. But now, on to the variants. And there's 8 main variants, including the classic Baneblade, but I'll also touch on a few more. The most similar to the El Clasico is the Hellhammer. It's basically just a swap of the Baneblade cannon for a Hellhammer cannon, which is specialized in close quarters urban warfare. The Hellhammer cannon shoots subatomic charges that create mini nuclear blasts on impact that are so strong that the concussive force is able to liquefy enemies behind cover. This naturally translates to a cannon that's weaker than an overcharged plasma on tabletop. But then, getting a bit weirder and perhaps just as iconic as the classic, we have the sister tank to the Baneblade, the Shadow Sword, which is honestly one of the most, if not the most, badass tanks in 40k. Designed specifically to hunt titans, this crazy little gal ditches the Demolisher cannon and humongo Baneblade gun for the most humongo of humongo guns, the Volcano Cannon. The Volcano Cannon is the strongest land-based laser weapon the Imperium has access to, and it's been known to one-shot titans. In order to fire the Volcano Cannon, the Shadow Sword has to disconnect its power from all non-essential systems and route them to the gun. As such, each Shadow Sword crew has one specialist with the sole responsibility of monitoring the tank's power. And a voluntary blackout is totally worth it because this gun is absolutely insane. For reference, I know tabletop isn't always representative of lore, but this thing is strength 24 with a flat damage value of 12. That means it wounds Imperial Knights on 2. Badass. And it still has 4 las cannons to really make sure you're dead. Hell, counterfeit Shadow Swords use turbo lasers in place of the Volcano Cannon for Emperor's sake. The shitty knockoff uses turbo lasers. But then, based on the Shadow Sword, we have the Bane Sword Siege Tank. This super heavy specializes in sieges and is used to shatter enemy defensive lines. In place of the Volcano Cannon, it has a formidable Quake Cannon. The Quake Cannon is the second most powerful cannon the Baneblade chassis has access to, and is essentially the giant artillery gun put on treads. It fires powerful, high-yield concussive shells that each contain a fragment of Exterminatist worlds in order to draw some of the, quote, earth-shattering power. Badass. And goddammit, if Superman taught me anything, shattered little pieces of destroyed planets are like the strongest thing ever. And the Quake Cannon continues to support that thesis. A single shot can blast through meters of armored walls, if not just outright destroying the building. And then another siege tank is the Storm Sword. This one originated as a field conversion of a Shadow Sword that replaced a broken volcano cannon with a giant siege cannon. The Storm Sword is specialized in city fighting, which, in this case, is incredibly literal since the Storm Sword aims to destroy important buildings. Crew are specially trained to target the ground floor weak points of buildings with the siege cannon in order to collapse them. In addition, the shockwave from the siege cannon is also deadly in quite a large radius. In fact, it's not uncommon for storm swords to shoot at the ground and cause devastating sinkholes, killing their enemies and destroying enemy fortifications. Then, to break away from sieging for a bit, we got the Bane Hammer, which excels in holding defensive positions. It's armed with a tremor cannon, which is kind of like a beefed up Earthshake around in that it's designed to slow enemy advances. The tremor cannon shoots a shell that burrows underneath targets and then detonates underground, creating a huge, tremor. The shockwave from the blast is said to liquefy the ground as well as nearby foes, and then those not killed by the blast are left to literally shake in their boots at the mini earthquake. In addition, the Banehammer is also a transport. It has a transport capacity of 26, and it can deploy a few guard squads to finish off stumbling foes that survive the tremor shot. Then, for the other transport Baneblade, we've got the Stormlord. Honestly, one of my favorites, simply due to the fact it has a carrying capacity of 40 and has the mega badass Vulcan Mega Bolters. This thing's both the ultimate IFV and ultimate infantry killer. Foregoing the heavy guns of its siblings, the Stormlord is fitted with the aforementioned mega badass Vulcan Mega Bolters, and these are literally just dual Gatling bolters that unleash a storm of heavy bolt rounds. The Stormlord is often deployed alongside Shadow Swords to serve as, and I quote, pest control. Imagine how much of a flex it is to be a guard commander who can dedicate a super heavy battle tank to quote unquote pests. In addition, its large carrying capacity also makes it the perfect companion for a Shadow Sword since it can deploy a mini army to hold points, defend the Shadow Sword, and complete objectives. And finally, it can also redirect some of its powers to make the Mega Bolters shoot at an even more mega rate. But finally, of the main variants, we have the Doomhammer. And I saved this one for last because Doomhammer is fun to say. The Doomhammer originated as a modified Banehammer. In a war zone rife with enemy titans, the guard regiments needed Shadow Swords but couldn't get any, so they had to do what any good commander would do and strapped a giant gun to their giant tank. Although not quite as devastating as a volcano cannon, the Doomhammer Mega Cannon is no slouch. It essentially acts as a ginormous melted cannon and was able to adequately battle titans. And it also turns out that there are some benefits to not having your entire tank dedicated to a single humongo cannon. Although weaker than a volcano cannon, the magma cannon doesn't require literally all of the tank's energy, so it can fire on the go, and it has space to transport some troops. So, whereas the Shadow Sword is more of an ambush predator, the Doomhammer is able to be more aggressive in rolling up to enemy faces and shooting them with thermochemical Sunhammer warheads. Then it can drop out some troops to punch the remains or, go to soccer practice or something. But with the Octoblade variants out of the way, some quickfire mentions of the other ones. The Stormblade is a knockoff Shadow Sword with a giant plasma cannon in place of the Volcano Cannon. Badass! The Storm Saber is a upscaled Baneblade that acts as a literal mobile fortress with a cannon even bigger than a Volcano Cannon. This thing started as a Storm Sword kit batch with a literal fortress. Badass! Then finally, the Stormhammer is a Vanguard assault tank that's likened to a naval destroyer since it has even more guns than usual and is used to explore the most hazardous environments. This thing has a Stormhammer cannon and dual battle cannons just as their primary armaments. Badass! Oh, and who could forget the Lord Hellblade, of course. It's this badass little blue guy. But that's the Baneblade. Coolest shit ever. I love this tank. It's just so cool to have a gargantuan brick running up the field, shooting a billion guns and tearing everyone apart. My Baneblade is the Abyssal Serpent, and while most stupid people opt to get their quote-unquote first drink on their 21st birthday and, a party or something, I, for one, am a smart and badass dude, so I got a Baneblade. Can I get a hell yeah for the coolest decision ever? And also, on the topic of questionable first strings, it should actually be illegal that the Baneblade innately hits on force and can only take orders from the tippy top commander of the Imperial Guard. Baneblade crews are the most elite tankers the Guard has to offer, and these motherfuckers can't even hit their giant explosive shots half of the time. Nor can they listen to some guy telling them to aim good or drive a little faster. But I digress. So, along with the hell yeahs I requested earlier, let me know what your favorite Baneblade variant is in the comments below. Also, you might as well help me convince myself into getting a fourth Baneblade chassis like a complete and total psycho. I mean, Apocalypse is coming back after all, so... Anyways, though, thank you for watching, and thank you to all my awesome patrons. You're all very epic, and you help the channel out a ton. Also, Baneblades in lore are often command vehicles. Give the coolest tank ever something, GW! Please! I want to hit on threes without taking the Horse Lord. Hi friends, today I'm going to talk about a topic near and dear to my whittle crack heart. Today we're going to talk about the Imperial Stormtroopers. No, not those ones, I mean the hell gun toting, carapace wearing, ultra elites of the Imperial Guard. And yes, that means the Kazakhin are in this very video. Let's go, baby! The magnum opus of this channel is today, because I get to talk about my favorite things in all of Warhammer. But we'll get to them later. First, though, what exactly are Stormtroopers? Well, in the Astra Militarum, Stormtroopers are a general term for the elite shock troopers of the Guard. No, not those ones, even more elite. Stormtroopers are the absolute best of the best for the Guard. They're highly trained, ultra competent, and widely feared. They are the absolute peak of the human physique and are basically like special forces or heavy infantry of the Guard. Think laser blast and Navy SEALs, SAS, or whatever your favorite country spec op guys are called. Now, dudes like the Navy SEALs are already badass in real life, so add a bit of 40k insanity and you're bound to get the Navy SEAL of approval and total badassery. These are just regular humans who get sent on suicidal Space Marine level missions, and they get shit done. Most regiments have access to stormtroopers in some capacity, and the regiment-specific ones oftentimes have slightly different roles in training. So today I'll talk about all the notable ones, and before getting into that, let me just describe some of the general traits that all the stormtroopers display more than less. Every type of Militarum Stormtrooper is at peak physical physique, sometimes even sporting some light genetic enhancements and other augments. Despite being mostly unaugmented, these guys are sometimes described as doing actually insane feats. Things like fighting orcs in melee, matching Dark Eldar in speed, dodging bullets, and other things humans really shouldn't be able to do. Along with their physical strength, Stormtroopers are also efficient tacticians and have incredible combat instinct. They make split-second battlefield decisions and work in near-perfect coordination with their squad mates. They literally have the power of friendship on their side. Additionally, Stormtroopers are given some of the best equipment of the Militarum. They're issued carapace armor, which, like an ogre, it's got layers, and the armor is essentially an in-between of standard flak armor and power armor. It's very resistant to weapons up to lasguns, which, if you actually know lasgun lore, is actually mighty impressive, but it won't laugh off a plasma shot or anything. Speaking of plasmas or anything, Stormtroopers also have access to a host of special weapons like plasmas, meltas, hotshot volleys, or pretty much anything else that the Imperials use. But even their standard weapon is a potent killing machine. Hellguns, or hotshot lasguns if you're a dork, are basically supercharged lasguns that have extreme penetration abilities. This makes it a very formidable weapon. The standard lasgun is already devastating against fleshy bits, but it struggles against armor. By literally bypassing that weakness, the Hellguns are a hyper-lethal weapon that can even efficiently kill Marines. But what's a weapon if you can't aim the thing? Stormtroopers are expert marksmen. They target weak spots and shoot with near perfect accuracy. I know tabletop isn't always consistent with the lore, but they have the same accuracy as Space Marines and sometimes even better. Space Marines are mega augmented freaks with literal aim assist, so this says a lot. Essentially, Stormtroopers shoot as good as your friend thinks he does in games. But finally, let's get into the specific type of Stormtroopers because, well, I'm tired of saying Stormtroopers, and I probably attracted some Star Wars fans. So let's start off with likely the most widespread and most spec op themed dudes, the Tempestus Scions. Primarily specializing in deep strike assaults, recon missions, and infiltrations, Scions are some of the best stormtroopers, if not the best stormtroopers around. Tempestus Scions begin their lives like most people do, as children. From there, they begin their ascent to Sciondom. Often, Scion recruits are orphans of Imperial elites who are raised by the Scala Progenium, which is the same place that commissars, assassins, sisters of battle, and even some inquisitors are taught. Think like 40k versions of those private Catholic schools, except the students and scholars are still somehow less pretentious and insufferable than the average private school kid. At the Scala Progenia, the orphans are put through extremely rigorous training as well as being heavily indoctrinated into the Imperial cult. Part of their training has their memories wiped, and then they get their minds mentally reconstructed into perfectly obedient pawns. Every scion needs to be willing to follow any order without question, no matter how much of a war crime it may or may not be. So they probably just play a COD campaign, and then their final test is braving the dreaded Xbox Live lobby. And to be honest, a lot of the Scion training lore sounds kind of like a middle schooler writing what he thinks to be the most edgy, hardcore, badass stuff he could think of. So I won't touch on every single bit, just fill in the rest with a Mad Lib variation of the above sentence. Kid stepped out of line, so the drill abbot brutally poked their nutsack and then snuggled it in order to set an example to the others. Okay, maybe that one didn't work out super well, but there is some dumb shit like that, like them breaking aspirin's spines and then ripping it out and putting it in a jar, a flipping jar, and then displaying that jar as a warning to others. So just comment down below your version, and we'll see who has the chops to be an Imperial drill abbot. Another funny part of their training is that they need to get rid of their names and replace it with the name of an Imperial hero. This is to make trainees disassociate from their personal identities, as well as being a reminder of the heroism they must aspire to. But I find it funny because just like imagine a Navy SEAL team of some dudes named George Washington, MLK, Paul Bunyan, and Neil Armstrong, all led by Sergeant Elvis Presley. But after rigorous training, each and every recruit is reborn as Scion. Equally skilled as they are obedient, as previously mentioned, their main role is often deep striking. They ride Valkyries and Tauroxes into critical locations and use shock tactics to achieve whatever objective they were assigned. Also, rich orphan who went through rigorous training, got high-tech gear, and is the peak of humanity. Yeah, put the Scions with Kurz in the Batman-like fellows of 40k room. Speaking of drop troopers, this one's a bit on the fence if they're technically a type of stormtrooper, but they have carapace armor, they like special weapons, and they're elite troops, so I'll count it. Plus, much like a storm, these dudes love to be in the skies, so they're actually some of the most stormtroopers to ever storm. I'm talking about the Harakoni Warhawks. Using grav shoots, these guys carry out drop assaults and even work closely with Scions. The Warhawks are some of the best stormtroopers, if not the best stormtroopers around. Not too much is known about these guys, but that might just be because what is already known is just so badass that any more would make people go insane. The Warhawks train on their native world with grav gliders and are some of the most proficient aerial troops, often compared to the Elysians. I personally think that GW really drop troopered the ball by not giving these dudes a little bit more love. Now, the next few Stormtrooper types are a bit less spec ops and more heavy troopers. While they have approximately the same capabilities of all the other Stormtrooper types, they are more integrated with the regular guard regiments and foregoes deep strikes and infiltration for a more direct head-on approach. These dudes are generally dropped off in the most brutal combat zones and are just supposed to wreck as much shit as humanly possible. First up, the Death Corps Grenadiers. As you may have deduced from the name, these are the elites of the Death Corps of Krieg. The Death Corps Grenadiers are some of the best stormtroopers, if not the best stormtroopers around. Unlike the Scions, Grenadiers are mostly made up of hardened veterans rather than brainwashed orphans. I mean, the Krieg are kinda all brainwashed orphans, I think, but these brainwashed orphans get to go to war zones instead of school, so probably the better option. Also, unlike Scions, the Grenadiers are actually fully part of their regiment and aren't a specialized regiment that fights along other guard forces. Even more so than regular Kriegers, the Grenadiers are expected to die, which is saying a lot because the regular Kriegers are literally called the Death Corps. The second word sounding a lot like Corps, as in C-O-R-P-S-E, Corps. This means that when appointed a Grenadier, the Guardsman already considers themselves dead and will do anything they are ordered to do with even more fervor, which is pretty metal. It's very similar to the Kriegers. The Armageddon Steel Legion Stormtroopers are integrated with the normal regiments and go on the most dangerous spots to, in technical terms, wreck hog. Armageddon Grenadiers are some of the best Stormtroopers, if not the best Stormtroopers around. I couldn't really find too much information on these guys, but just assume they're yellow version of the Death Corps Grenadiers, just like how the Steel Legion as a whole are yellow versions of the Death Corps of Krieg. Alright, so back to more infiltration-focused stormtroopers. The Catachan Devil are skilled at tracking, scout operations, and they are particularly ferocious in melee combat. Catachan Devils are some of the best stormtroopers, if not the best stormtroopers around. And for this section, I just need to say one thing. The legend Sly Marbo is a Catachan Devil. That's it. That's all I need to say to show how badass these dudes really are. But they are really cool, so I'll say a bit more. One particularly cool thing about these stormtroopers is that their senses are so keen that they can sense enemies even if the enemies have cloaking devices. It smells like bitch in here! Catachan Devil's main battlefield tactic is to stealthily infiltrate deep into enemy lines, and then from there they set traps, subtly influence enemy movements, and occasionally ambush some isolated targets. Then, when the rest of the Catachan regiment arrives, the Devils completely break their cover and then pincer the enemy forces. Okay, finally, it's the moment you and I, but mostly I've been waiting for. I finally get to talk about them. I finally get to talk about the coolest troops in the entire world, the Kazarkin. Woo! Just like the rest of the regiment, the Kazarkin are very versatile and used in a variety of ways. From infiltration missions to shock assaults, the Kazarkin can do it all. The Kazarkin are some of the best stormtroopers, if not the best stormtroopers around. This time for real. Unlike Scions, Kazarkin are mostly made up of hardened veterans who have proved themselves in the battlefield. This means that, in general, Kazarkin are more respected and admired than Scions. Kazarkin are normal dudes who are just so gosh darn good at killing things that they got extra training, bigger guns, and cooler clothes, whereas Scions are brainwashed, personality-less weirdos. So many guardsmen look down on Scions as toy soldier glory boys, which, that is ironic considering almost everything in 40k are literally toy soldiers. In addition to veterans, Kazarkin can also be picked from particularly promising white shields. If a recruit shows exceptional skills as a white shield, they can be reassigned for Kazarkin training. Traditionally, Kazarkin were exclusively Cadian, but after the fall of their planet, Kazarkin recruits can come from non-Cadian regiments. These non-Cadian recruits typically have to work hard to prove themselves to the Cadian-born Kazarkin that they are truly deserving of the prestigious role. If accepted as a true equal, the non-Cadian recruits can earn the Kazarkin's signature Caudicade Sea Eagle tattoo. While the tattoo is given to all Cadian Kazarkin, non-Cadian Kazarkin need to show that they're truly the best of the best. They don't call Cadians gatekeepers for nothing. Speaking of the fall of Cadia, although the planet fell, many millions of Kazarkin still kick ass across the galaxy, perhaps with even more fervor than before their planet's destruction. Another interesting product of the planet's fall is how different Kazarkin feel towards the loss of their home. Some Kazarkin were angry at the Cadians who were present at the fall since they had failed their ultimate duty. Those Kazarkin believe that maybe if they were there, perhaps things would have went a little bit better. So they're literally the dude in the "what would you do in this situation? Intervene" tweet. Other Kazarkin are angry at themselves for not being at the planet to fight for their home. Even if it was physically impossible for them to be there, they still resent themselves for not doing anything. Due to their anguish, some Kazarkin have become even more zealous in order to earn forgiveness for their absence. These Kazarkin are the epitome of survivor's guilt, and they probably need some therapy. But no matter how they feel about the fall, the Kazarkin are not discouraged and are just as determined and as deadly as before. To the Kazarkin and the Cadians as a whole, Cadia stands as long as Cadians are still killing shit. I paraphrase that a bit, but that's basically what they feel like. Kazarkin are consistently described as the best of the best, even more so than their contemporaries. Like most stormtroopers, the Kazarkin are often dropped into critical points to disrupt enemy lines, usually via Chimera transports or Valkyrie airdrops. A few Kazarkin kill teams can completely turn the tide of a losing battle. Kazarkin are so well regarded and respected throughout the galaxy that other regiments, as well as notable Imperial Guard figures, can request a service of them. If approved by Cadian High Command, Kazarkin teams can be sent to serve as bodyguards, elite troopers, or whatever these funky folk might need them for. Now, if this circle jerk of a section hasn't convinced you that the Kazarkin are some of the coolest things in 40k, let me just describe some of their most notable feats. This one gets talked about a lot, but for good reason. It's just absolutely freaking awesome. In the Eisenhorn books, Eisenhorn fights some cultists, and the cultists have a demon host on their side, which is basically just a demon bound to a mortal body. I say just, but being bound to a mortal body actually tends to make demons even more powerful than they are in the Materium. Because you see, demons are beings of the immaterium, so much like an OnlyFans model, they need to spend a great deal of effort to maintain their figure. Demons usually need to spend at least some of their power in order to maintain form in the Materium. Demon hosts, on the other hand, have a convenient body, so they could focus a bit more and go a little bit more nutty. All that was to put this next part into perspective. When Eisenhorn encountered the demon host, his Kazarkin guard immediately went to fight the demon host. Their Hellguns didn't work since Eisenhorn was in the way, so they said, "Alright buddy, no laser, no problem, get ready to catch these hands." And then these absolute mad lads tackled the demon host, stabbed the crap out of it, ripped his spine out, and momentarily incapacitated it before being slain by the demon. Keep in mind, these are regular, unaugmented humans fighting an ultra mega powered demon in melee. Even though they all perished, 3 regular dudes doing this much damage to a freaking demon host is insane. Another notable feat is how well they fare against Space Marines. GW has always been a bit inconsistent, but Kazakh can match up to Marines seemingly with a ratio of 5 Kazakh to 1 Marine on the lower end to about 30 Kazakh to 1 Marine at the Fall Acadia, which is super impressive. Even if they're being really conservative on the higher end and saying something like 50 Kazakh into 1 Space Marine, that would still make them insanely efficient considering the difference in production time and the sheer numbers. Theoretically, if the Codex Astartes is assumed to be followed by the majority of chapters, then there should be about a million Loyalist Marines, and there are theoretically even less Chaos Marines. On the other end, Kazakh numbers are in the high multi-millions. But again, keep in mind that GW numbers are consistently inconsistent, so you could take that with a grain of salt. But still, really good for regular humans. I just love the Guard because they represent the best of humanity, standing up to the myriad horrors of the galaxy. And to me, Kazakh and Stormtroopers exemplify this the most, through pure grit, rigorous training, and sometimes a teensy bit of mind-altering chemicals. The indomitable human spirit is embodied in the greatest warriors of the Astra Militarum. So I hope you enjoyed me fangirling about some of the coolest units in all of 40k. I just really love all the Stormtrooper types, from their lore to their whole aesthetic. GW really goes hard on a lot of these guys' designs. Obviously, the Kazakh design is my favorite. I just love the respirator and the heavy look of the armor, along with their really awesome lore. But the other Stormtroopers are super cool as well. The extra armor on the Kree Grenadiers and their skull mask, that looks freaking awesome. And then the Scions, they also look cool, especially in art when they're like round eyes pierce through the fog or the darkness. And then Scions are cool, but the old designs for the Inquisitorial Stormtroopers, those were absolutely awesome. I love their asymmetrical masks and their general design. I mean, the models, the poses were a bit wonky at times, and I do prefer the cabled Hellgun. But I would have loved to see the Scions being a teensy bit closer to these Inquisitorial Stormtrooper designs. And don't think I forgot about the original Stormtroopers. They're a tad bit plain, but the understated look with the berets is actually really cool. Plus, the cables feeding into the grip is a pretty cool design feature as well. But that's all I've got for today. Thank you for watching, and thank you to all the patrons that support the channel. You're some of the coolest, if not the coolest people around. Okay, so I absolutely love the Inquisitorial Stormtroopers designs, but I'm gonna be honest, some of the poses on their models are legit so wonky that it's kind of funny. Like, half of them look like they're doing the chicken dance with the way their elbows are popping out, and others have like actual Space Marine parts reused for their weapons. And their faces, they look like the Easter Island heads. But you know, I still love them, and the Plasma Pistol, Bolter, and Auspex Sky will always have a place in my heart. Hi friends, let me just be real with you. I'm hyped for the new Kill Team box. I covered orcs last week, so let's talk about abhumans next. Plus, we'll finally be talking about the good old Guard again. Yippee! So what exactly is an abhuman? They're abominable, that's what they are, and they need a purging. Unless they're useful, that is. But even then, they're still quite abominable. But taking off the silly pants for a second, abhumans are GW's excuse to put more fantasy races into 40k. Alright, I'm just kidding. Silly pants all the way off now. Abhumans are basically just subspecies of humans that evolved to better live on planets with radical environments. Abhumans are looked down upon in the greater Imperium and are usually considered lesser beings. Only the most useful or most normal looking abhumans like Ratlings or Ogryn are allowed Imperial citizenship. And there's a lot of abhuman types with various levels of mutation. Officially, according to Imperial records, there are 27 existing abhuman types. But in this video, I'm only going to cover the most prominent ones, or the ones I like. So, RIP Stiltlim fans, they won't be mentioned in this video or, you know, pretty much anywhere else from this point forward. So with that out of the way, let's start this right off with the Ratlings. And no, these guys aren't rat people. Rat people in 40k would be stupid. Piss off, Skaven fans. Ratlings are actually just hobbits with sniper rifles, which honestly is pretty cool. The Ratlings are the smallest abhumans and developed their short stature due to inbreeding and, according to the Rogue Trader, living on worlds with, quote, sporific climates and abundant harvests, which you would think eating a lot and taking nappy naps would make you taller, but I guess banging your sister kinda outweighs that. Ratlings are, of course, very short, as the Hobbit stand-in, but they're also pretty weak, hedonistic, love to eat, and are, and I quote, dumpy. Why, hello there, Frank Reynolds from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Hello, Ratling from Warhammer 40,000. And you might think, Well, these aren't traditionally the traits you would look for in a soldier. And you'd be right. But ratlings do have their advantages that make them useful to the Imperium as a whole. Their small stature actually makes them quite good as ship crew. Short, check. Round, check. Ship crew, check. Additionally, the Ratlings have a natural talent for marksmanship. Frank Reynolds also likes guns, by the way, although his marksmanship is questionable. Ratlings are described as being able to hit shots from over a mile away. This good shooting, their short stature, and their tendency to scurry away from danger makes them excellent snipers and scouts for the Imperial Guard. Also, just imagine being a centuries old space marine veteran of the Long War who has slain countless enemies and is feared across the sector just to get domed by a 3 foot tall, hairy footed, short stack eating a ham sandwich. Typical Guard W. Speaking of ham sandwiches, though, Ratlings are also excellent cooks, which definitely helps their popularity among the other guardsmen. Next up, let's talk about one of the most recognizable abhumans, the Beastmen. Beastmen are, as their name suggests, men of the beast variety. Ooh, not that horrific. But the Beastmen, they're basically semi-feral goatmen, and their goatishness does tend to vary from beastman to beastman. For instance, there's more man-looking beastmen and more beast-looking beastmen, but generally they have the torso and arms of a man and the legs and head of a goat. Do you ever just look at a goat and think, man, that's pretty cool? Too bad those dumbass hoofs can't shoot an assault rifle, though. Well, if you had that insane thought, the Beastmen got you covered. From a combat perspective, the Beastmen actually have a great combo going for them. They're stronger than the average human and have beast-like aggression, while also having the dexterity to use weapons and tools. However, from a haughty perspective, they're gravely lacking, as they are generally perceived as gross, ugly monster men and are treated as such in Imperial society. In recent times, Beastmen have been mostly phased out of the Imperial Guard and are even being classified as Xenos by some Imperials. This, in conjunction with their natural aggression and feral instincts, makes them very susceptible to falling to the taint of chaos. Pfft, abhuman and chaos worshipper? Sheesh! Pick a struggle, heretic. A righteous struggle, like being subjugated in the Imperium, that is. Now, for one of the most important abhumans, if not the most important abhuman, the Imperial Navigators are big blue alligator people who just love 3D technology. I'm just kidding, of course, although that would be pretty cool. Imperial navigators are the navigators of the Imperium and are immensely important. Usually they're pretty much regular humans other than the third eye, and this third eye is what makes them so dang valuable to the Imperium as a whole. This third eye allows the navigators to open a teensy tiny warp gate so they could peer into the warp and sense the Astronomicon's light. Using the information, they're able to do as their name suggests and navigate Imperial vessels through the treacherous immaterium. Navigators are bred in the ancient Navis nobility, and the Navis nobility is one of the few organizations with some autonomy from the greater Imperium due to its extreme importance. There are also a ton of inbreeding in these Navis houses since they want to preserve the Navigator gene. These recreations of the ancient Alabamian rituals of creation of course lead to some mutations in the abhumans. Mutation inception, if you will. Some are actually beneficial, but most of them just make the navigators into ugly, disgusting, yucky freakazoids. Speaking of ugly, disgusting, yucky freakazoids, let's move on to actual big alligator people. The Scalies are basically big, strong lizard people, and they originated in the toxic underhives of Necromunda and have since stabilized into the abhuman subspecies we know and love today. Except, I bet most of you didn't know about them until today. But that's okay, because I'm going to tell you about them right now. They possess some of the magnificent powers of lizards, like regeneration, thick scales that act as armor, and looking pretty dang cool. Other than that, they're often used by gangers for their strength. Other than punching things real good, these lizard dudes are also strong enough to carry big, vaguely pirate themed guns like spear launchers and giant blunderbusses called scatter cannons. Next abhuman on the list is Brad Pitt in Fight Club. Human, check. Ab, sextuple check. Next, another dude who likes to fight and is strong are everyone's favorite dum-dums, the Ogrins. Woo! The Ogrins are the strongest abhuman type, and these giants are often given giant guns and giant knives, thrown into giant fights, and are expected to make a giant mess. The Ogrins originate from human settlers on worlds with strong gravity, many of these worlds being prison worlds, which, again, just like Ratlings, this evolutionary path doesn't seem to make much sense. Being on a high gravity world should theoretically make the malnourished prisoners short and squat, not unlike the creatively named squats, another abhuman species. But whatever, the Ogrins are as stupid as they are strong, as loyal as they are stupid, and as strong as they are loyal. This makes them perfectly suited for frontline assaults and bodyguard positions. The Ogrins are usually given Ripper guns, which are giant shotguns made to be quote unquote Ogrin proof, so that the Ogrins can't break their own weapons, and it also allows the Ripper gun to work as a giant club. Which is nice since most Ogrins are masters of the ancient martial art of bonking someone on the head and breaking every bone in their body. So, with their great strength, Ripper guns, huge stature, and natural durability, the Ogrins are a terrifying foe up close. Ogrins are also widely used enough to have some specialists. The smartest Ogrin, those being the ones who count past 4 and make more original jokes, are given an augment called the Biochemical Ogrin Neural Enhancement, or BONE, and are called Boneheads. These Ogrins serve as the sergeants of Ogrin squads. There's also the Bulgrin, who are the more elite Ogrin, equipped with carapace armor and special weapons like power mauls, grenadier gauntlets, and a variety of shields. Which, carapace armor and special weapons, wouldn't that kind of make you like, Ogrin Kazarkin? Wow! The Bulgrin's heavier armor and unique special weapons make them excel as living defensive walls as well as hard to kill shock troops. Also, these dudes' armor is part tank track, which is pretty dang cool. And to close off this section, I just want to mention that the Ogrin's immense loyalty and stupidity does have some downsides as they can be manipulated to serve chaos. A lot of these Chaos Ogrins were tricked into thinking that they're actually serving the Emperor and that the enemies they fight are the real heretics. Yeah, if you can't tell this dude's an evil devil worshipper, then you'd have to be pretty dang stupid. Oh wait, that's a loyalist marine. Oops. But moving on, these next two abhumans, they're kind of similar. Both are humans who are augmented to the point of getting classified as abhumans. The Afral strain are guardsmen who are genetically altered to exhibit the trait of the greatest heroes of the Imperium in order to be the perfect guardsman. And it actually worked. These dudes are pretty much super soldiers. However, there's just one hitch. They have cripplingly bad luck. And not just the typical lose your life savings and any chance of people loving you again at the casino, bad luck either. These dudes give the Lamenters a run for their money. Usually they'll complete a mission with flying colors, and then they'll randomly trip on a rock and die afterwards, or something stupid like that. Due to this flaw, all the Alpha Strain regiments have perished. Oh, and also, they're all albino, which there's no way to really demonstrate that with my style, but just imagine this white drawing is more white than this white drawing. And despite all the regiments eventually dying, they are still being made and sent to die for the Imperium. And then, kind of similar to the Alpha Strain, there's the Gland Warriors, who are also heavily augmented super freakazoid guardsmen. They were originally made to fight Tyranids and are actually super effective. They're kind of like mini Space Marines in that they get pumped with a bunch of drugs and then have extra organs implanted into them. Those organs mostly being glands that secrete even more drugs into them. And then, just like real crackheads, these dudes are monstrous up close, utilizing giant knives, las pistols, and their iconic dueling glaives. However, they're also hindered by the fact that, well, they're crackheads. They're working on crack strength, and at any time they can just overdose and drop dead. And they also have literal crackhead energy. And I'm not talking about the TikTok girl crackhead energy where they'll drive their Corolla in a circle at the local 7-Eleven and say, "Oh, I'm such a crackhead" to all their friends. No. Gland Warrior crackhead energy is ripping your face off, screaming at the top of your lungs about your God Emperor, and then using the aforementioned ripped off face to suffocate a Tyranid. Oh, and Gland Warriors also have the superhuman ability to be the only good looking model in the Inquisitorial Agents kit. And then, just because I know people will be mad if I don't include these, there's the Felinids. They're just cat person guardsmen. They're described as more agile and pretty lethal killers, but that's about all for them. And yeah, those are some of the most prominent abhumans. Oh wait, I forgot the squats! But them getting forgotten is lore accurate, so we're all good. Just kidding, I'll touch on them a bit. These are just dwarves. They lived in the galactic core, and due to high gravity and their frequent space travel, they adapted to be quite, well, squats. They like mining, battle trikes, and being misidentified by pretty much everyone. Most of them were killed by the Tyranids, but survivors mostly became the Leagues of Votan or Tau auxiliaries called Demiurge. But yeah, the Leagues of Votan will probably get a video sometime. Maybe. I mean, maybe they'll get another kit sometime as well. But yeah, those are the most notable app humans. There's a lot more, but they're somewhat obscure or just boring. If I missed your favorite one, feel free to let me know in the comments. Also, let me know all your favorite funny Ogren moments. And of course, thank you for watching, and thank you to all my patrons who help this channel grow and improve. I appreciate it greatly. Oh no, it seems as though I forgot the funny Ogren moments part of this video. Perhaps they'll have to get their own video to cover it? Maybe. I don't know. If you really wanted to comment, I really, really, really want funny Ogren moments, please